Welcome to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation of Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, June 7th, 2020, and we are live tonight. We have a jam-packed show planned for you all tonight. A lot of information to cover. It's also my birthday as well, so thanks to everybody who's been sending me birthday wishes all day on social media. All right, well, look, it is so much going on. This has been a very historic week. We have seen a lot of the protests continue regarding the killing of George Floyd, and we are seeing changes being made to police departments across the country. We see the Minneapolis City Council announced today that they plan to disband the Minneapolis Police Department. We see tens of thousands of people all across the country and around the world, hundreds of thousands of people in total, at least around the world, protesting. We see protests in London, New Zealand. Protests continue in Detroit. So we're going to cover a lot of this information on today's show. We'll deal with George Floyd protests organized tens of thousands of people across the country and around the world fighting against racism and police violence. Police departments announced reforms. Also, we saw on Friday, June 5th, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell admits the NFL was wrong not to encourage NFL players to protest peacefully. However, he did not apologize to Colin Kaepernick. Found that very interesting. Now, those watching me on social media, you see me wearing my Colin Kaepernick shirt, right? Just washed it, looking good. Colin Kaepernick said, "I'm not going to stand for a flag that oppresses black people." But the full quote was, "I'm not going to stand for a flag that oppresses black people and people of color." And we see a diverse group of people who are out protesting all across the country. Now, also this past week, we saw that President Barack Obama spoke out on the killing of George Floyd, and we know there was a town hall meeting that his organization, My Brother's Keeper, had dealing with police violence and things like that. And President Barack Obama was calling for police reforms also. So we're going to talk some about that. I have his address that he gave, so I want you to hear that. And then we also saw articles this past week dealing with police unions and how police unions are very resistant to holding police officers accountable. And I posted a couple of them. New York Times has a big article, How Police Unions Became Such Powerful Opponents to Reform Efforts. This is from June 6th, 2020. New York Times, How Police Unions Became Such Powerful Opponents to Reform Efforts. And then also, police unions, you had some police unions that were against President Barack Obama and Black Lives Matter during the Obama administration. And NewYorkMag.com, New York Magazine, NYMag.com has a really good article, Trump's Plan to End Obama's Peaceful Reforms and Unshackle the Police Succeeded. Trump's Plan to End Obama's Peaceful Reforms and Unshackle the Police Succeeded. And that deals with the how the Lieutenant Bob Kroll, K-R-O-L-L, Lieutenant Bob Kroll, who is the president of the Minneapolis Police Union, how he was against the Obama administration reforms when it came to policing. And at a Trump rally in October 2019, he talked about how Donald Trump has taken the shackles off of police. Okay? And this is what I warned people about in 2016, and people didn't listen. A lot of people didn't listen to me. And what I said, what I warned you about regarding Trump has come true. And if you just look at what happened this past Monday, past Sunday, when you had peaceful protesters in Washington, D.C., and Donald Trump unleashes policing agents on peaceful protesters. to disband them so he can walk across to the church and take a photo op holding the Bible upside down. All right. So there was a lot of fallout and a lot of backlash he got from that, using various police forces on peaceful protesters, and then threatening to use the 1808 Insurrection Act and unleash thousands of military personnel, active military, on U.S. citizens. So this man is a dictator. I warned you about this in 2016. This man is a dictator. He's getting worse and worse each day. I think it was the past one of these days, either Friday or Saturday, he tweeted almost 200 times or so. And you would think he doesn't have a daytime job. He tweets so much. Okay, so we'll talk some about this, and I'm going to give you a ton of articles to go research also. So this is a lot of information. So we'll deal with that. We'll talk about police union chief trashes George Floyd and is a Trump supporter. That's Lieutenant Bob Crawl, who is the president of the Minneapolis Police Department. And then also we'll deal with the unemployment numbers came out on Thursday. It's about 1.8, 1.9 million people who filed for unemployment the previous week. But the job numbers came out Friday, the first Friday of each month. The job numbers come out. And the economy added 2.5 million jobs, but there is a misclassification error. There's a huge error with this. Okay, the unemployment rate dropped down to about 13.3%, I think it was. There's an error in this calculation. Washington Post has a big article about this. But also, when you look at the actual report from the BLS.gov, Bureau of Labor Statistics, at the bottom, it talks about the miscalculation. So really, the unemployment rate is really about 3% higher, 3 points higher, at about 16%. Okay, and let's see here. If we look at blackamericaweb.com, unemployment rate falls to 13.3%. Now there's a miscalculation error which we'll talk about. But the other thing that Donald Trump did not want to talk about, and he had a meeting in the Rose Garden on Friday to brag about the unemployment numbers. He didn't talk about the clarification. He didn't talk about the error, the misclassification error. He didn't talk about that. Another thing he didn't talk about is that even though the unemployment rate for white people dropped, the unemployment rate for African Americans went up from 16.7% to 16.8%. Okay, and he did not mention that at all. Okay, so I just find that very interesting. All right, and Yamiche Alcindor, our sister Yamiche Alcindor, called him out on this. All right, so I have a clip of that also. It was very interesting, that exchange that took place. But also this past Friday, Donald Trump had the nerve to talk about George Floyd and evoke the name of George Floyd. And he seemed to proclaim that George Floyd, who's killing by police in Minneapolis, would be happy with the economic news. He said, quote, "Hopefully George is looking down right now and saying this is a great thing that is happening for our country. This is a great day for him." He's dead, by the way. It's a great day for everybody. This is a great day in terms of equality. What equality is Donald Trump talking about? The unemployment rate for African Americans went up. What equality is he talking about? Then, when asked what his plan was to address concerns expressed by protesters, protesting all across the country, okay, for police reform, for some people say defund police. Now, I'm gonna tell you right now, you need to come up with a new term, because Donald Trump is already tweeting against defund the police, and he's tweeting law and order. Law and Order, as we talked about last week, and the full show from last week is 3 hours, is on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep. Go watch the show from last week. A lot of people are using the term defund police and they're not explaining what it is. And that's talking about defund police is a very, very good way of getting Donald Trump reelected. Law and Order is a throwback to Richard Nixon. Law and Order is the platform that Richard Nixon ran on in 1968 and won. And as I explained last week, law and order basically means protect white people and lock up black people. And Richard Nixon was a backlash to the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, the rebellions that were taking place all across the country, 1967 rebellions, the uprisings in 1967. You had 159 violent uprisings all across the country. Richard Nixon was a backlash to all of that. Okay? So when people say defund the police, a lot of people, and some people, it means different things to different people. Many of them are talking about taking responsibilities from police that don't require somebody with a gun and allocating that to mental health experts, allocating that to in other areas, and reducing the responsibility of the police. And many police officers will tell you, hey, look, we're not social workers, okay? You need another response. When you're dealing with somebody that's mentally ill, you need another response than for police to come out. Because many of them are not trained to deal with mentally ill people and the different types of mental illness. Okay? So when you can reduce the responsibilities of police, you can reallocate money into prevention, reallocate money into mental health services, education, job programs, etc. All right? Well, I was watching MSNBC. Today, Jacob Soboroff was at one of the protests. He was interviewing one of the protesters. She may have been 19, 20, 21, something like that. And he asked her what she wants. She said defund police. She said defund police 3 times during the 1 minute, 1.5 minute interview. She didn't explain what defund police means. And you create an opening for people to juxtapose defund police to law and order. So they have to. So really, you're talking about reallocating resources. You have to come up with another term than defund police. I'm telling you right now, that's a very good way to get Donald Trump reelected. I'm telling you right now. So you know, hey, all right. I warned you in 2016. People didn't want to listen to me, and I was right. Okay, so but asked what his plan was to address concerns expressed by protesters, Donald Trump said, "That's what my plan is. We're going to have the strongest economy in the world." Now, the protesters all across the country wanting an end to racism. They want structural changes in the economy. They want police reform, various types of police reforms. And Donald Trump's answer to the racial injustice and economic inequities when it comes to African Americans, etc. This is out of his own mouth. This is what he said at the press conference. Okay? If you go to NBCnews.com and also NBC News on YouTube, they have the full press conference. This fool said that he said, that's what my plan is. We're going to have the strongest economy in the world. But before coronavirus hit and 42 million people were unemployed in 11 weeks, you said that economy was the greatest economy in history, and you bragged about African Americans have the lowest unemployment rate. Well, all those structural inequities and racial injustice, all that stuff existed in what you said was the greatest economy in the history of this country. So, you know, hopefully people listen to me this time. What's the point of studying history if you ain't gonna learn from mistakes? Okay, all right. So we'll deal with some of that, right? I know we're coming up on a break here in 2 minutes. We have what, 2 minutes before the break, JT?
Yeah, you got 3 minutes.
3 minutes before the break. All right, my man. All right, so, and also the call-in numbers, area code 313. Call-in numbers 313-778-7600, 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. We're coming up on the break here. Also on the other side of the break, on tonight's show, let's see, we'll also deal with the Congressional Black Caucus and Democrats. The Democrats, especially led by the Congressional Black Caucus, are preparing sweeping police reform bills after George Floyd's death. There have been some different articles written about this. We're going to talk about that. And then many people are asking, what's next after marching? What's next after marching? And one of the things that people are proposing that has already been implemented in certain cities is the concept of 8 can't wait. 8 can't wait. And these are 8 policies that can reduce police killings up to 72%. And you don't need state legislature to get involved. You don't need Congress to get involved. Okay, we'll talk about that as well. 8 can't wait. All right, you listen to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation, the Future Radio. Yeah, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, June 7th, 2020, and we are live. Once again, right before the break, I laid out the topics for tonight's show. We have a lot of information to cover, and not a lot of time to do it in. Okay, once again, the call-in number is 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. And I have the printer going in the background, trying to print some information up here. So on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Because right now it's correct wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his actions. Because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now we deal with a number of different topics here. On the African History Network show, we deal with education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Also visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and you can sign up for our email newsletter as well at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right, we're broadcasting on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Then also my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, I-M-H-O-T-E-P, on YouTube. All right, so we have a lot of information to cover on tonight's show. All right, so let's jump into this. I want to deal with some updates here on what's going on. We'll deal with some of these specific articles that I have. And then also, I'm going to deal with part 4 of Joe Biden's plan, Joe Biden's agenda for African Americans. Okay, so each week I'm dealing with a different section dealing with Joe Biden's plan for African Americans. Is broken up into 6 parts, and we dealt with part 3 last week. Okay, part 3 was dealing with healthcare and ending health disparities by race. Okay, this week we'll deal with part 4. Part 4 deals with strengthen America's commitment to justice. Deals with criminal justice reform. Strengthen America's commitment to justice. And what's interesting is you can also read his full platform at joebiden.com. I've read his entire platform. You know, my March 10th show, we dealt with March 10th. I compared the platforms of the different Democratic candidates to each other. And then April 26th, after everybody dropped out and he was endorsed by President Obama and Bernie Sanders, he expanded his platform, so I dealt with his platform then. Then when his African American, the 22-page African American agenda, his policies for the African American community came out, I dealt with that as well. So that's what we're dealing with. So we'll do a part 4 on tonight's show, or today's show. Okay. What's interesting also is that Politico.com has an article, and we'll talk about this. This is from June 4th, 2020. Police groups break with Biden. Police groups break with Biden. it deals with how Joe Biden's call for more national policing reforms and oversight in the wake of the death of George Floyd, and the perception that he has not shown enough solidarity with law enforcement amid the ensuing nationwide protests and unrest, have created a fissure with law enforcement groups, leaving many who once supported Joe Biden frustrated by what they regard as political posturing by their one-time ally. But at the same time, you have to understand that the violent crimes across the country are at around a 44-year low. Violent crimes peaked in 1992. And we saw that the prison population dropped the U.S. prison population dropped each subsequent year under the Obama administration. We saw a record number of investigations to the patterns and practices of police departments. We saw the 2013 policy under Attorney General Eric Holder, which backed off of charging the longest, harshest sentences for low-level nonviolent drug offenders. We saw President Barack Obama's 21st century task force when it comes to policing, dealing with putting together best practices and recommendations for police departments. So, and also under the Obama administration, the war on drugs was winding down, because you're dealing with a different time, and there was a consensus that was formed by Democrats as well as many Republicans that the war on drugs did not work. So you're dealing with a different time. Okay, so okay, some people still stuck in the past, but all right. So, all right. So we'll deal with some of these topics as well, and we'll do 2 hours here on 9:10 a.m. Superstation, and we'll continue on my social media platforms as long as I have energy. We'll see how that goes. All right, but two top administration officials. Let's see here. I want to deal with some updates dealing with what's taking place with the protests across the country. 9 Minneapolis City Council members on Sunday, June 7th, announced plans to disband the city's police department. They did not offer a timeline or specific actions they plan to take, but said they are taking intermediate steps toward ending, quote unquote, intermediate steps toward ending the force, the Minneapolis Police Department. The group represents a majority on the 12-person council. So this is a veto-proof majority. All right. Now, once again, this is not going to take place overnight, and they're trying to figure out exactly how to implement this. Right. Meanwhile, protesters across the country say their work is far from over, as 2 weeks after George Floyd's killing. They continue to denounce entrenched bias in law enforcement and call for sweeping changes. Two top Trump administration officials cut a stark contrast on Sunday, June 7th, saying they do not believe there is systemic racism in the country's police. Attorney General William Barr suggested he's reluctant to investigate potential deeper policing problems in Minneapolis, where the national firestorm began. So you have to understand, and I posted articles dealing with this, right? There has been a stark contrast towards the way the Obama administration dealt with policing than the Trump administration. I explained this to people in 2016, and a lot of our people still don't understand this. There were more investigations into the patterns and practices of police departments under the Obama administration than any previous administration. There were about 24, 25 investigations. This led to about 14 or 15 consent decrees, including the Baltimore Police Department and the Chicago Police Department. The Trump administration, Trump ran on the platform of law and order. As I stated before the break, law and order means protect white people and lock up black people. Trump, when he was campaigning, as I talked about in our May 31st show, Trump said police don't have enough power. He said police need more power, not less power. News1.com has the article where Mike Pence was on the campaign trail, and Mike Pence was the governor of Indiana. Mike Pence was on the campaign trail in 2016, and he said that he and Donald Trump think there is too much conversation or too much talk about racial bias and implicit bias in policing. Okay? News1.com. Read this article from News1.com. Mike Pence denial of institutional bias reveals GOP hurdles. Mike Pence denial of institutional bias reveals GOP hurdles. Okay? This is from this article. What's the date on this article? This is from September 26, 2016. September 26, 2016. So this is 2 months before the election. Okay? And it says the issue of deadly police violence against unarmed African Americans and the tension between law enforcement and African Americans are topics that should be addressed during Monday night's presidential debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. But Republican vice presidential nominee Mike Pence may have already made it clear where Trump's ticket stands on these issues, as well as the presence of systematic racism in America. Okay, now as I explained last week and defined racism from a historical perspective, you don't have to say systematic when you say racism. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race. See, the problem is that oftentimes when the term racism is used, it's never defined from a historical perspective what racism is. So people are confused. You don't have to say systematic racism. That's like saying wet water. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race, which comes out of the ideology of white supremacy. Racism occurs when one race of people control the majority of the wealth, power, resources, benefits, privileges, land, access to opportunity, access to education, media, wealth, jobs, etc., industry, and they use that to marginalize, subordinate, and do harm to another race of people. This is what racism is. So you don't have to say systematic racism. There ain't no other type of racism. Racism is a group-to-group relationship. What happens is people talk about individual racism. Individual racism don't exist. Racism is a group-to-group relationship. It's not individual to group. People confuse bigotry and discrimination and racism. They lump all that stuff together. No, those are not the same thing. And white supremacy is an ideology. Not to make this, go back and watch the May 31st show. Not to make this long, because I have a lot of information to get through, but we don't understand these terms. The ideology of white supremacy is going to evolve as Europeans are coming out of the Dark Ages, after they have been dealing with the African Moors for 800 years. From 711 AD up until 1492 in Spain, January 2nd, 1492, Boabdil relinquishes Granada, the last stronghold that the Moors had in Spain. Okay, but there's still going to be Moors there. Some are going to be enslaved. Some are going to be taken by the Spanish into Spanish territories. This is when we look at the transatlantic slave trade. Once again, okay, not to make this long, but the transatlantic slave trade is a continuation of the wars that were going on between the African Moors and Europeans in Europe for hundreds of years. It's a continuation. It's the start of a new chapter. But as one of my teachers, Professor Kabahaya Wata Kamene, correctly states, to understand the existence of something, you must first understand the pre-existence of existence. So you can't start in 1619. You're dealing with wars going on before then. It's a continuation. And codified slave laws did not exist in the 13 British colonies in 1619. That's something that's going to evolve. The first British colony to have codified slave laws was Massachusetts in 1641. They're coming to the different colonies at different times. And as I explained last week, all this is about sex. Because the Moors were intermixing with Europeans all throughout Europe. Spain, Portugal, Sicily, Italy, France, Germany, Austria, England, and to various degrees changing the complexion of Europeans. And because most of them are going in from Morocco into Spain and Portugal, and Spain and Portugal at that time, 711 AD, was called the Iberian Peninsula. It wasn't called Spain and Portugal. Okay? They're getting the brunt of it. So the complexion of the Spanish and Portuguese historically was darker than those of the English and the Austria and those in Austria and Germany, because they're further away from where the Moors are going into Europe in general. In general. So you can't look at 1619 as like just being just being like the total beginning of something. It's a continuation. You can't look at the Portuguese going into Mauritania in 1441 as just something just totally new. It's a continuation. When the transatlantic, the Portuguese are the first ones involved in the transatlantic slave trade, right about 1441. They dominated for the first 200 years. That wasn't the first time they came in contact with African people. They'd already been dealing with them for hundreds of years. So when I see projects like the 1619 project, I know they meant well, but this, you have to deal with, you can't just deal with the last 500 years of history. You have to deal with what led up to Columbus setting sail in 1492. Okay, August 3rd, 1492. And the day before, on August 2nd, 1492, Spain kicks out the Sephardim, the Sephardic Jews. January 2nd, 1492, the Reconquista is complete, and Spain takes back control of the territory, of the land, from the Moors, from the African Moors. This is a continuation. So we have to understand this, okay? And then, okay, to make a long story short, read the book Golden Age of the Moor, edited by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. Golden Age of the Moor. Read that book. And it has essays from Dr. Jose Pimenta Bay, Runoko Rashidi, Dr. Wayne Chandler, Dr. John G. Jackson, okay, breaking down all this history. And the Moors are taking teachings into Europe from ancient Kemet, from the Nile Valley, ancient Egypt, from the Nile Valley region of Africa, taking this into Europe, bringing Europe out of the Dark Ages. Europe was cast into the Dark Ages when the Vandals and Visigoths crushed the western portion of the Roman Empire in 476 AD. And then you have the bubonic plague that's going to hit from 1347 to 1400, and Europe loses one quarter to 1/3 of their population, between 25 million to 75 million people. You have to understand this chronology of like at least the last 1,000 years of history. Okay, and then read this book by read this one here by my friend Runoko Rashidi, who's a world traveler. Brilliant brother. Been to, I think last time I checked, about 125 countries and islands all around the world. Black Star, the African presence in early Europe, which documents that history of the African Moors all throughout Europe. This is how you get a Queen Charlotte Sophia, who was the wife of King George III. She was of African Moorish ancestry on her mother's side, at least on her mother's side. And King George III is the king that the 13 colonies are rebelling against during the American Revolutionary War. And Charlottesville, Virginia is named after an African woman, Queen Charlotte Sophia. So Charlottesville, where in August of 2017, you had the racist attack by the white supremacists there in Charlottesville. Charlottesville is named after an African woman. Wouldn't the white supremacists have a fit if they found that out? So, all right, that's tonight's history lesson, today's history lesson, okay? I got a ton of information. But you have to, all this comes out of historical context and a lack of understanding history. So when we talk about white supremacy and race, understanding white supremacy and racism, what it is and how it works, and as Dr. Francis Cress Wilson and Lily Fuller correctly taught us, if you do not understand European white supremacy and racism, what it is and how it works, everything else that you think that you understand will totally confuse you. You have to have a historical foundation to really understand all of this. And most Americans don't, regardless of race. Most Americans, most African Americans, most white people don't understand history, don't understand racism. That's why you still have a lot of Confederate monuments still up. Those were traitors. Those were people who took up arms and committed treason against the U.S., against the Union, and treason is defined by Article 3, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution. Nations don't have monuments and statues honoring traitors to the country. If you go to Germany, there are no statues honoring Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. They don't have schools and buildings and things like this named after the Nazis and Adolf Hitler. That's not what nations do. But still here you have all these Confederate monuments because there was a concerted effort called the Lost Cause. There's a concerted effort called the Lost Cause to rewrite the history of the Confederacy and what the whole fight was about. And it was just about states' rights. And, you know, they're fighting against the Yankees. These are the rebels. They're fighting against the Yankees. And one of the shows, one of the tools that did help to rewrite this history and confuse people was the TV show The Dukes of Hazzard. Now, I'm not saying the Dukes of Hazzard was created to do this. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying just a good old boy, never meaning no harm, beats all you ever saw get in trouble with the law since the day they were born. When you watch the TV show Dukes of Hazzard, and many of us watched it when we were kids, you know, these just some good old boys, born Luke Duke and Uncle Jesse and Daisy Duke, you know, and they named Cut Off Jeans after Daisy Duke, and then I think the group was a tag team. Which group was that? Had the song "Look at Them Girls" with the Daisy Duke song. Becomes a huge hit, and then for like 20 years, high cut off jeans like that were called Daisy Dukes, right? Well, when you look at the car that Born Luke Duke drove, it was a Charger called General Lee, named after General Robert E. Lee, a man who committed treason against the Union and was a brutal slave owner. And on top of the General Lee is the Confederate battle flag of Northern Virginia under General Robert E. Lee's army. That's not even the Confederate flag. Because there were 3 flags that flew over the Confederate States of America from 1861 to 1865. That flag was not one of them. So the flag that white supremacists and many Donald Trump supporters, not all Donald Trump supporters, but a lot of them, think it's the Confederate flag is not even the Confederate flag. That's the Confederate battle flag of Northern Virginia under General Robert E. Lee's army. But they don't understand history. So this is why this study right here is so important from the Southern Poverty Law Center, Teaching Hard History American Slavery. Teaching Hard History American Slavery. You can download this. You can get it for free. It's about 52 pages. SPLcenter.org. SPLcenter.org. I took it to a printer, got it printed up. And this documents how the history of slavery in this country is mistaught in schools all across the country. And they come up with a number of very good, easy recommendations to more correctly teach the history of slavery. Teaching Hard History American Slavery. Okay, we got a call in numbers 313-778-7600. 313-778-7600 is the call in number if you have a question or comment. This is the African History Network show. Once again, thanks for all the birthday wishes. I got like over 100 of them on Facebook alone. So thanks for that. All right, so let's continue here with these updates. We see that Attorney General William Barr does not want to investigate the Minneapolis Police Department because he doesn't want to investigate any police department because the Trump administration has largely taken a hands-off approach to policing, which is a reversal from the Obama administration. But too many people didn't want to listen and don't like really study this stuff, so they don't know this. New York Mag.com had a really good article. Trump's plan to end Obama's peaceful reforms and unshackle the police succeeded. Okay, read this article, and it talks about how last October, Minneapolis Police Union President Bob Kroll, Kroll, appeared at a Trump rally, October 2019. The weekend of May 31st, 2020, on AM Joy, Joanne Reed played a clip of Lieutenant Bob Kroll, who is the president of the Minneapolis Police Union. He was at a Trump rally in October 2019, and he thanked Donald Trump for taking the shackles off of police. And he said under the Obama administration put the shackles on police because they were focusing on holding police accountable, basically as much as they could from the federal level. as I talked about last week's show, the majority of control over policing is at the state and local level, not the federal level. Okay? And that also deals with the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that gives states rights. But a lot of us don't understand it because we ain't never read the Constitution. Go to loc.gov, Library of Congress website, loc.gov and archives.gov, and read the U.S. Constitution. Because if you understand the U.S. Constitution, a lot of this stuff falls into place. The U.S. Constitution gave the powers to the Congress, gave the powers to the presidency. Article 1 deals with the powers of Congress. Article 2 deals with the power of the presidency, the executive branch. The U.S. Constitution creates the Department of Justice, creates the U.S. Postal Service. Article 1 creates the U.S. Postal Service. It creates the Electoral College. All of this stuff comes from the U.S. Constitution. And Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution clearly states that the U.S. Constitution, all of the previous treaties, and all of the subsequent treaties are the supreme law of the land. So, clad in his red Cops for Trump t-shirt, Lieutenant Bob Crawl, who is the Minneapolis Police Union president, and according to this article from New York Mag, who has been alleged, quote unquote alleged, to be affiliated with white supremacists, he gloated that Donald Trump had unshackled his police officers from the restraints imposed by the Obama administration. He said, quote, the Obama administration and the handcuffing and oppression of police was despicable, end quote. Now this is the head of the Minneapolis Police Union saying this, because the Obama administration was focused on holding police accountable. This is one of the things that the investigations into the patterns and practices of police departments was doing. Also, the Obama administration, they took away so because of the Black Lives Matter movement, there was a lot of talk of the police having military weapons. Well, the Obama administration put in place the policy not to give police departments military weapons from the federal government. Guess what Trump did? He reversed it. He reversed it because he wants the police departments to have military weapons. So, and we're coming up on a break here in I think about 6 minutes. Quote, Lieutenant Bob Crawl, who is the president of the Minneapolis Police Union, he said, quote, the Obama administration and the handcuffing and oppression of police was despicable. The first thing President Trump did when he took office was turn that around and got rid of the Holder, Attorney General Eric Holder, Loretta Lynch regime, and decided to start letting the cops do their job, put the handcuffs on the criminals instead of us. End quote. So the article goes on to say, we will never know if that unshackling emboldened Derek Chauvin to murder George Floyd. But the line between the relief demanded by Lieutenant Bob Crawl, who is the president of the Minneapolis Police Union, on behalf of Minneapolis police, and the naked assassination committed on camera by one of his officers is quite direct. The world around us, in which the streets of every major American city are filled with protesters, is the result of Trump granting the wishes of the most retrograde police officers. They are getting what they asked for. Now, you go back to 2016, Donald Trump was at a town hall meeting that Fox News organized. Donald Trump said that in Chicago, they need to use stop and frisk to cut down on violence in Chicago. This was after a federal judge ruled stop and frisk unconstitutional. But watch this. In states like Virginia, especially West Virginia, Ohio, because of the opioid addiction, in certain areas they've seen an increase in crime, right? Now still, nationwide, violent crimes are still at about a 44, 45, near 44, 45 year lows. Nothing like it was in 92, when violent crimes peaked in 92. And if you go to bjs.gov, Bureau of Justice Statistics, because I've gone and done research there, Bureau of Justice, you can see they have information there with violent crimes and how it peaked in 92, increase in the U.S. prison populations, things like this, because what people don't understand is that the U.S. prison population quadruples from 1970 to 1993. It goes from about 300,000 in 1970 to 1.3 million in 1993. This is before the crime bill was signed September 13, 1994. This is why, once again, you got to deal with a continuum of history. People want to start things in 94. I don't know why. Is that when you were born? I mean, because if you actually understand history, you understand the war on drugs was declared by Richard Nixon June 17, 1971 in front of Congress when he's asking for an increase in funding to fight the war on drugs. And if you look at the April 2016 front page story from Harper's Bazaar Weekly, and see, I've done an entire lecture dealing with the history of the war on drugs, going back to Richard Nixon. I deal with how Richard Nixon's war on drugs was a war on the African American community. And we go through the decades. Dan Baum wrote this story for Harper's Bazaar Weekly. All the news outlets picked this story up. He interviewed, in 1990, I think it was 1994, he interviewed John Ehrlichman. John Ehrlichman was Richard Nixon's domestic policy advisor. When he interviewed John Ehrlichman, now John Ehrlichman went to prison because of the Watergate scandal. He did about 18 months in a federal prison. When he interviewed John Ehrlichman said, "You want to know what the war on drugs was about?" He said, "We figured we knew it was targeting the anti-war movement against Vietnam, the hippies, and the African American community." He said, "We knew we could not make it illegal to be against the war, and we knew we can make it illegal to be black. But if we could associate marijuana with the hippie movement, and if we could associate heroin with the African American community, then we can do surveillance, we can increase surveillance on them, we can break up their organizations, we can infiltrate their organizations, things like this." This is what Dan Baum, B-A-U-M, who's a journalist, this is what he said that John Ehrlichman, who was Richard Nixon's domestic policy advisor, this is what he said John Ehrlichman told him about the war on drugs. So you got to understand this history. Because I listen to what people say and most people don't. I'm just going to be honest with you. You know, I ain't going to call no names like Charlemagne the God, but, you know, some of them don't really understand this history. So, let's continue. Let me see. How much time we have before the break, JT?
You got 3 minutes.
3 minutes. All right. Thank you. Okay. So, the last few years of the Obama administration were one of the most productive periods of criminal justice reform in American history. The Obama administration changed sentencing guidelines to reduce the disparity in the treatment of drug crimes that had disproportionately harmed African American defendants. Nobody really wants to talk about that, right? Let's just skip over that. You know, Obama ain't doing nothing. Black people, okay, whatever. Yeah, okay, yeah. I don't know who the hell you've been listening to. As part of an effort to inculcate a, quote, guardian, not a warrior, end quote, mindset, it restricted the transfer of surplus military equipment to police departments. This is something that directly the Black Lives Matter movement was asking for. They're saying police departments don't need to have these military equipment. Well, the Obama administration stopped that. It restricted the transfer of surplus military equipment to police departments. Donald Trump said, no, we want them to have all this stuff. So Trump reversed that. Most importantly, it formed consent decrees with more than a dozen police departments, there's about 14, to force them to change their practices. Now, when Attorney General Jeff Sessions, Donald Trump's first Attorney General, became Attorney General, one of the first things Jeff Sessions tried to do was back the Department of Justice out of the consent decrees with the Baltimore Police Department and the Chicago Police Department. Luckily, a federal judge refused to allow that to happen. But Donald Trump campaigned on what all he was going to do for black people. Why would he want the Department of Justice to back out of consent decrees to reform the Baltimore Police Department and the Chicago Police Department and hold them accountable? I can't figure that out. So these reforms did not root out brutality and racism, which is true. They were mild both in form and intent, undertaken with the goal of conciliating police and their communities, believing that enhancing trust would ultimately create safer conditions for police as well as those who fear them. It was the epitome of evolutionary cultural change. And at the same time, it's important to understand, when we deal with consent decrees, the Department of Justice is operating based upon power given to them by Congress. So they have to operate within the scope of the powers that Congress gave them. And with consent decrees, there is a process in implementing them. And the Department of Justice does have the ability to disband a police department, but it's a legal process they have to go through to do that, okay, as well. So this was the context of Trump's nightmarish claims in 2016 that cities were being overtaken by bloodshed and carnage. Whatever wisps of WISPs of data he could cite to support his wild rhetoric, Trump was drawing a picture borrowed from the imaginations of resentful police who experienced Obama's carefully drawn nudges as intolerable oppression. Because not all police, there are about approximately 800,000 police officers, about 18,500 police departments. But you have some of them who don't want to be held accountable, don't want cultural change and things like this. Okay? Okay, so we're coming up here on a break. We'll continue this on the other side of the break. Listen to the African History Network show right here on 910 a.m. Superstation Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 a.m. the Superstation Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, June 7th, 2020. And I share this birthday with Prince. Prince's birthday is June 7th. Also, Dr. Ray Hagan's birthday is June 7th. And Sabir Bey. His birthday is June. My friend Sabir Bey's birthday is June 7th. And Dr. Ray Hagan is one of my teachers of the African Village. All right. I wanted to get... Oh, let me... Everybody check out this article from fox2detroit.com. Woman incited a riot on her own Facebook Live video, Michigan police say. Police said Allie Lyons, white woman, was streaming live and was telling her friends to throw bricks and other objects at the windows of multiple businesses in downtown Grand Rapids, Michigan. This is during a protest dealing with the killing of George Floyd. Police also said her and her friends were looting a jewelry store after the glass had been shattered. Quote, defendant could be heard telling her friends to get her a gold bracelet because she already had silver ones, end quote, police said in the affidavit. Now this don't have nothing to do with George. This is a white woman and her friends up there looting. Okay? And then that gets associated with George Floyd and African Americans, things like this. This is what I talked about last week. Okay? Read that from fox2detroit.com. I posted it on my Facebook fan page. You got like over 2,000 likes. And this is what we this is what we were talking about last week. We'll go back and watch the May 31st show. Okay. So right before the break, we were doing an update on what's taking place all across the country, what's taking place with police reforms, and we were talking about police unions as well, and how police unions historically have been resistant to change and accountability, many of them, accountability when it comes to policing. So TheGuardian.com has this article from, what's this date? June 1st, 2020. Anger as local police union chief calls George Floyd a violent criminal. Anger as local police union chief calls George Floyd a violent criminal. Lieutenant Bob Kroll, Kroll, who is the president of the Minneapolis Police Union, we were just talking about him before the break, Lieutenant Bob Cross says protests organized by quote-unquote terrorist movement. Okay? Now, I'm not saying all police union chiefs are like this, but we've seen a number of them, police union presidents. We've seen a number of them like this. Okay? The president of the Minneapolis Police Union has written to its members calling George Floyd a violent criminal. Now, this is the same Lieutenant Bob Cross who October 2019 was at the Trump rally wearing a t-shirt that said "Cops for Trump." This is the same Lieutenant Bob Cross, as I said before the break, who at that Trump rally said, quote, "The Obama administration and the handcuffing and oppression of police was despicable. The first thing President Trump did when he took office was turn that around, got rid of the Holder Loretta Lynch regime, and decided to start letting the cops do their job and put the handcuffs on the criminals instead of us. Because many of them don't want any accountability." And that's what was happening under the Obama administration. This is why a lot of those police voted for Trump, who ran on the platform partly of law and order, which is a dog whistle back to Richard Nixon, 1968. But if you don't understand history, right? You just sit back and say, we don't need to vote. We just need to do economic empowerment and invest in the stock market. So that's important. And your ass needs to vote too. Because politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. And it's not always what somebody can do for you, it's also understanding how to block what people are trying to do to you. So if we understood Richard Nixon in '68, we would have seen Trump coming and we would have stopped him. Because we had the votes to stop him. But a lot of people didn't really understand this. So the president of the Minneapolis Police Union has written to his members calling George Floyd a, quote, violent criminal, end quote, describing those protesting over his death as terrorists and criticizing the city's political leadership for not authorizing greater use of force to stop the rioting. That's Lieutenant Bob Cross who wrote this, who was wearing the Cops for Trump shirt. So when you can see you can see just a direct line, a common thread through all of this. So the letter drew a swift rebuke from a former Minneapolis police chief who called it a disgrace. Lieutenant Bob Kroll, Kroll, president of the Police Officers Federation of Minneapolis, defended the 4 officers involved in George Floyd's death, including Derek Chauvin, who had his knee on George Floyd's neck for more than 8 minutes in the lead up to his death on May 25th, 2020. He defended that. And he's a Trump supporter. Okay. Yeah. Elections have consequences. Derek Chauvin is facing murder and manslaughter charges, and we know it was upgraded to second-degree murder. And all 4 were fired, and we know the other 3 have been charged also. Okay. So the Star Tribune, which is a newspaper there in Minneapolis, the Star Tribune reported, quote, "What is not being told," this is what Lieutenant Bob Kroll wrote in his letter. Quote, "What is not being told is the violent criminal history of George Floyd. The media would not air this. I've worked with the 4 defense attorneys that are representing each of our 4 terminated individuals under criminal investigation, in addition with our labor attorneys, to fight for their jobs. They were terminated without due process." Okay, well, George Floyd was killed without due process. So read the rest of this article. He talks about the terrorist movement that is currently occurring was a long time build up which dates back years. It said, read this article here. This is from the Guardian.com. Anger as local police union chief calls George Floyd a violent criminal. Well, what Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd was violent also. It was violent, cruel, and inhumane. Okay, so check out this article here. All right, now let's continue. So Donald Trump said Sunday morning that he is ordering National Guard troops to begin withdrawing from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. We saw Mayor Muriel Bowser had Black Lives Matter painted there on the there in Washington, D.C. on the mall there. I think it was the mall. The New York Times on Sunday announced the resignation of its editorial page editor James Bennett. The announcement comes 4 days after the newspaper published a controversial op-ed from Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas. And Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas called for military intervention in U.S. cities racked by protests over police violence. He backed up Trump threatening to use the 1807 Insurrection Act. Now, if the name Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas sounds familiar, you heard me talking about it before, that's because Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas and Senator Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III of Alabama in 2015 blocked the bill in the U.S. Senate which dealt with which had bipartisan support to bring about criminal justice reform. That bill was passed under Trump with the help of the Congressional Black Caucus in the House of Representatives and Senator Kamala Harris and Senator Cory Booker in the Senate. And that's the First Step Act. First Step Act didn't start with Trump. They were trying to get that passed under Obama, but it was 2 Republicans in the Senate that blocked it from being passed. Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, who wrote this op-ed for the New York Times, okay, who agreed with Donald Trump and trying to use the 1807 Insurrection Act and agreed with Donald Trump using police to disperse the protesters, the peaceful protesters there in D.C. Then we see New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, and other cities announce Sunday that they would lift their curfews. So we see curfews being lifted. We saw here in Detroit for some of the past few nights, the 8 o'clock curfew has not been imposed from Chief James Craig because the protesters have been peaceful. Okay. Former Vice President Joe Biden is planning to meet privately with George Floyd's family Monday in Houston, Texas, where George Floyd's funeral will be held on Tuesday. George Floyd's brother is scheduled to testify before Congress on Wednesday, the first congressional hearing on law enforcement reform since his brother's killing in police custody on Memorial Day, May 25th. Protesters in the English city of Bristol toppled a statue of the 17th century merchant, politician, and slave trader Edward Colston on Sunday. I was watching reporting on black people protesting in London behind this. New Zealand. People are protesting all around the world. All right. Call-in number is 313-778-7600. It's a call-in number if you have a question or comment. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. Do we have any callers, JT?
Yeah, so we can go to line 1 with Kwame.
Okay, Kwame on line 1. Kwame, welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from.
Hey, how you doing, brother?
All right. Which city you calling from, Kwame?
Desmond Tutu came to Detroit when Coleman Young was married. He said he had never met any nice cops. Mm-hmm. That's because black police are not an occupying force in the community. They're out there trying to do an honest job. And that's all the people want. And Trump and all these other people want to put occupying forces in our community. Mm-hmm. We're not interested in war. We're interested in protection.
Right. Now, here in the city of Detroit, we don't have, even though there is some police brutality, things like this, it's not like in a lot of other cities across the country. So here in the city of Detroit is kind of unique. When you talk about Bishop Desmond Tutu,
Detroit is the example of what it should be. Detroit is closer to the example of what it should be.
Yeah, and
I said, what it should be. I said, what it's closer to the example of what it should be. We need police that are going to actually protect people and property in the city. We don't want an occupying force. That's what Trump and those people are talking about.
Right, and see what happens is
occupying military force.
Right, and see what happens is with Trump, the way he sees African Americans he sees African Americans in general as a group that needs to be policed, not protected. So he doesn't talk about sending resources to African American communities for prevention, for education, job programs, things like this. He talks about sending in the feds. He talks about sending in police. Okay. And so, because this is how he thinks. This is how he thinks. Go ahead.
Act like they are a military occupying force. They're there to protect us. They work for us.
Yeah.
That's my point. And then, look, we're dealing with a long legacy of police brutality.
Well, yeah, you're dealing with just. Let me just say this and I'll let you continue. You're dealing with modern day police departments and modern day police coming out of slave patrols during slavery. Okay, this is what this is going to evolve out of. Okay, so go ahead and finish your thought.
No, we just want protection. That's what we need. We need protection. We need police that's going to do an honest job. Mm-hmm. We don't have to. I mean, the problem is obvious. I mean, the whole country is based. Its existence is based upon white supremacy. That's clear.
Right.
I mean, Trump can't argue about that. Nobody can argue about that.
Right.
We simply want police that want to do an honest job. What is the problem with that?
Serve and protect, yeah. Okay, Kwame, thanks for calling. Keep listening. All right, so let me continue with the updates here. Okay, so Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel E. Bowser has formally asked Donald Trump to withdraw all extraordinary federal law enforcement and military presence from the city. The letter came after a sixth night of demonstrations ended in arrests and amid criticism that the extra presence is making things worse and creating multiple chains of command. Because, see, Donald Trump is a wannabe dictator. Okay, he's a wannabe dictator. So he told the governors, I think it was last week, he told the governors, you have to win the streets back, right? So he's focusing on force. He's focusing on might, not hearing what the protesters are protesting about, things like this, right? He's just focusing on force. He wants to be like Erdogan. He wants to be like Kim Jong-un. He wants to be a dictator. Let's see. So we know the memorial service this past Thursday took place for George Floyd. Reverend Al Sharpton delivered the eulogy. Reverend Al Sharpton said it's time for us to stand up in George's name and say, get your knee off our necks. Also, the American Civil Liberties Union and Black Lives Matter accused the Trump administration, accused Donald Trump and his administration of authorizing an unprovoked and frankly criminal attack. Quote, unprovoked and frankly criminal attack, end quote, on demonstrators to enable a presidential photo op in front of the historic St. John's Episcopal Church. I posted an article dealing with that as well, that lawsuit. In his most extensive comments on the widespread civil unrest, Attorney General William Barr defended the aggressive law enforcement response while acknowledging the long-standing concerns with police that were exposed by George Floyd's death. But he is reluctant to do an investigation into the patterns and practices of police departments. Now, we also saw so much happened this past week. We saw New Orleans Saints quarterback Drew Brees apologize for comments that were insensitive and completely missed the mark on the issues we are facing right now as a country, end quote, he said. And this was a day after he told Yahoo News he would never agree with anyone disrespecting the flag. NFL players who knelt during the national anthem have consistently said they were raising awareness about police brutality. It wasn't about the flag. Okay. Are we up against a break right now, JT?
Yeah, you got like 30 seconds.
Okay. Okay, and then also Senate Democrats plan to gather for a lengthy moment of silence. That's coming up Thursday. Moment of silence Thursday morning in the Capitol Visitor Center's Emancipation Hall. Okay, we're going to continue this on the other side of the break. We're going to talk about the bill that Congressional Black Caucus and Democrats have. We're going to get into some of these other topics. We'll talk about Colin Kaepernick, the Roger Goodell, NFL commissioner, came out and apologized to the NFL players for not came out apologizing to the NFL players basically, but didn't apologize to Colin Kaepernick. Okay, Roger Goodell says NFL was wrong not to encourage players to protest peacefully, but he ain't apologized to Colin Kaepernick. Okay, that's why I have my Colin Kaepernick shirt on right now. Listen to the African History Network show right here on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation of Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Hi, I'm Joe.
Okay, stand by, everybody.
Okay.
We're on commercial break. Let's see. Where are we? Okay. So a lot of people want to get into shape. They've been quarantined. A lot of African American women want to get into shape, and SheRanHerselfFit.com can help you with this. Now, She Ran Herself Fit's mission is to inspire and motivate women to make healthy lifestyle changes. She Ran Herself Fit is a brand that promotes women living a healthy lifestyle by making small sacrifices in your daily routine and changing your diet. You can combat many of the different diseases that are prevalent in the African American community: diabetes and high blood pressure, heart disease. The owner, She Ran Herself Fit, her name is Felicia. Felicia lost over 200 pounds by changing her diet and running. Now, running may not be your motivation that drives you, but find out what fits you. She Ran Herself Fit is an apparel can be purchased at the website SheRanHerselfFit.com. SheRanHerselfFit.com. All right, now a lot of people are looking for healthy products, soaps and things like this, and Sage and Elm Apothecary.com is your one-stop shop for that. They use simple ingredients such as whole fruits, herbs, and vegetables. Each product crafted offers a unique plant-based experience. They have over 60 different products like beautifully handcrafted soaps, natural toothpaste, hydrating oils, deodorants, face masks, shampoos, conditioners, and so much more. Visit their website, Sage and Elm, ELM, Sage and Elm Apothecary.com, APOTHECARY. Use the promo code AHN Spring 20, AHN Spring 20, and get 20% off at SageandElmApothecary.com. All right, stand by. We'll be back in just a minute here. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, June 7th, 2020. We are live. Also, if you want to donate to the African History Network, $, the AHN Show through Cash App, $, the AHN Show through Cash App, and PayPal.me/the AHN Show through PayPal. PayPal.me/the AHN Show through PayPal. Okay. All right. Right before the break, we were giving you an update on everything that's going on, and we saw that this past Friday on June 5th, Roger Goodell, NFL commissioner, did a very interesting video, and NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell apologized to players for. He apologized to players for not listening to their concerns regarding racism sooner. Okay, now this was very interesting because he didn't mention Colin Kaepernick at all. Okay, in a video posted to Twitter, Roger Goodell offered his condolences to families who have endured police brutality, including George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. And we know her birthday was Friday. She would have been 27. And Ahmaud Arbery. Okay. Roger Goodell said, quote, "We, the National Football League, condemn racism and the systematic oppression of black people. We, the National Football League, admit we were wrong for not listening to NFL players earlier and encourage all players to speak out and peacefully protest." Okay? Now, that's very interesting because you had NFL players like Jerry Jones of the Dallas Cowboys, a lot of these old white men who were against the players protesting, silently taking a knee, were against all that. The NFL has been a flashpoint for protests. Oh, also, some of these NFL players donated to Donald Trump's campaign also, and the Trump supporters. Okay? The NFL has been a flashpoint for protests over police violence ever since Colin Kaepernick began kneeling in 2016 during the national anthem before games. Kaepernick has since gone unsigned and emerged as a leading voice in opposition of police violence. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison tweeted his support for Roger Goodell's statement, but said the league should go further to address the treatment of Colin Kaepernick. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison said, "I'm glad the NFL condemns racism, admits we were wrong, quote unquote, we were wrong. But what about former San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick?" Now, Roger Goodell's statement on Friday came on the heels of a video released by NFL players on Thursday calling for the end of systemic racism, which is redundant because racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race. Now, the video was directed at the NFL. This is what NFL players put together. Okay? Read the rest of this article here from NBCnews.com. Goodell says NFL was wrong to encourage players to protest peacefully. Now, I wonder if they're going to come out and apologize to Colin Kaepernick. I know he got a settlement, but you need to publicly admit that you were wrong. Now, are you going to offer him a job on the team? Now, not only should they offer him a job on the team, but when he retires, they should put together a special package for him to become a team owner. Not only should he have a job on the team, because they got some scrubs. They passed Colin Kaepernick up to get jobs to a bunch of scrubs. Okay? But they should put together a special package for him to become a team owner, part of a team or whatever. Okay? So read this article from NBCnews.com. This is from June 5th, 2020. Goodell says NFL was wrong not to encourage players to protest peacefully. All right, so we have that that took place this past week as well, and I'm just skimming through some of these updates here, just make sure I hit everything. All right, so also this past week we saw President Obama. Let's go to that article here. We saw My Brother's Keeper had a town hall meeting. Obama calls for police reforms, tells protesters to make people in power uncomfortable. Former President Barack Obama offered advice to demonstrators during a virtual town hall meeting on Wednesday, and his first on-camera remarks as growing unrest against police brutality continues across the country. President Obama said, quote, "To bring about real change, we both have to highlight a problem and make people in power uncomfortable. But we also have to translate that into practical solutions and laws that can be implemented." Okay, so if you are interviewed on TV and they ask, "What do you want?" you say, "Defund the police." You have to explain to people what that is, because everybody doesn't understand that. And you have some people say abolish the police. You have some people say reallocate resources from police. You have different people saying different things. So you have to be able to explain to people exactly what it is that you're talking about. In previous speeches, President Obama offered veiled condemnation of Donald Trump's administration for its response to the coronavirus outbreak. Okay, the 110,000 deaths, over 110,000 deaths, over 1.8 million reported cases in the U.S. But in this address President Obama offered counsel as protests continues across the nation amid the pandemic. Let our news, he said, quote, I want to speak directly to the young men and women of color in this country, he said. I want you to know that you matter. I want you to know that your lives matter, that your dreams matter, end quote. Now, what's interesting is that Senator Mitt Romney of Utah was out with the protesters. They protested, and he said Black Lives Matter. I know Trump is tearing them up on Twitter. Because when Trump ran in 2016, Trump spoke out against Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement. Okay. President Obama said in his address that this moment is politically advantageous for protesters who are calling for widespread police reforms and large-scale institutional change, unlike similar moments of unrest in the nation's history. For instance, the former president said he rejected comparisons to the 1960s when the nation was at war overseas while the civil rights movement was happening domestically amid police violence and the assassinations of political and community leaders. He said, quote, I know enough about that history to say there is something different here. He said, noting that polls show a majority of Americans support the protests. Quote, there is a change in mindset that's taking place, a greater recognition that we can do better, end quote. To read the rest of this article, we have the clip queued up from President Obama, JT.
Which one was that?
The clip, that is, let's see here, which clip is that? That is clip, hold on. I think it's clip.
Is it the Obama remarks on George Floyd?
Yeah, the Obama remarks on George Floyd. We have that queued up?
Yeah, I got that one all set.
Okay, let's go to that clip.
We have seen in the last several weeks, last few months, the kinds of epic changes and events in our country that are as profound as anything that I've seen in my lifetime. And I'm now a lot older than planned. I'm going to be 59 soon. And let me begin by acknowledging that although all of us have been feeling pain, uncertainty, disruption, some folks have been feeling it more than others. Most of all, the pain that's been experienced by the families of George and Brianna and Ahmaud and Tony and Sean and too many others to mention, those that we thought about during that moment of silence. And to those families who've been directly affected by tragedy, please know that Michelle and I and the nation grieve with you, hold you in our prayers. We're committed to the fight of creating a more just nation in memory of your sons and daughters. And we can't forget that even as we're confronting the particular acts of violence that led to those losses, our nation and the world is still in the midst of a global pandemic that's exposed the vulnerabilities of our healthcare system, but also the disparate treatment and, as a consequence, the disparate impact that exists in our healthcare system, the unequal investment, the biases that have led to a disproportionate number of infections and loss of life in communities of color. So in a lot of ways, what has happened over the last several weeks is challenges and structural problems here in the United States have been thrown into high relief. They're the outcomes not just of the immediate moments in time, but they're the result of a long history of slavery and Jim Crow and redlining and institutionalized racism that too often have been the plague, this original sin of our society. And in some ways, as tragic as these past few weeks have been, as difficult and scary and uncertain as they've been, they've also been an incredible opportunity for people to be awakened to some of these underlying trends. And they offer an opportunity for us to all work together to tackle them, to take them on, to change America and make it live up to its highest ideals. And part of what's made me so hopeful is the fact that so many young people have been galvanized and activated and motivated and mobilized. Because historically, so much of the progress that we've made in our society has been because of young people. Dr. King was a young man when he got involved. Cesar Chavez was a young man. Malcolm X was a young man. The leaders of the feminist movement were young people. Leaders of union movements were young people. The leaders of the environmental movement in this country and the movement to make sure that the LGBT community finally had a voice and was represented were young people. And so when sometimes I feel despair, I just see what's happening with young people all across the country and the talent and the voice and the sophistication that they're displaying. And it makes me feel optimistic. It makes me feel as if, this country is going to get better. Now, I want to speak directly to the young men and women of color in this country, who, as Plan just so eloquently described, have witnessed too much violence and too much death. And too often, some of that violence has come from folks who were supposed to be serving and protecting you. I want you to know that you matter. I want you to know that your lives matter, that your dreams matter. And when I go home and I look at the faces of my daughters, Sasha and Malia, and I look at my nephews and nieces, I see limitless potential that deserves to flourish and thrive. And you should be able to learn and make mistakes and live a life of joy with heart. And so I hope that you also feel hopeful, even as you may feel angry, because you have the power to make things better, and you have helped to make the entire country feel as if this is something that's got to change. You've communicated a sense of urgency that is as powerful and as transformative as anything that I've seen in recent years. I want to acknowledge the folks in law enforcement that share the goals of reimagining policing, because there are folks out there who took the oath to serve your communities and your countries, have a tough job, and I know you're just as outraged about the tragedies in recent weeks as are many of the protesters. And so we're grateful for the vast majority of you who protect and serve. I've been heartened to see those in law enforcement who've recognized, let me march along with these protesters. Let me stand side by side and recognize that I want to be part of the solution. And who've shown restraint and volunteered and engaged and listened, because you're a vital part of the conversation. And change is going to require everybody's participation. Now, when I was in office, as was mentioned, I created a task force on 21st century policing in the wake of the tragic killing of Michael Brown. That task force, which included law enforcement and community leaders and activists, was charged to develop a very specific set of recommendations to strengthen public trust and foster better working relationships between law enforcement and communities that they're supposed to protect, even as they're continuing to promote effective crime reduction. And that report showcased a range of solutions and strategies that were proven and that were based on data and research to improve community policing and collect better data and reporting and identify and do something about implicit bias in how police were trained, and reforms to use the force that police deploy in ways that increase safety rather than precipitate tragedy. And that report demonstrated something that's critical for us today. Most of the reforms that are needed to prevent the type of violence and injustices that we've seen take place at the local level. Now, reform has to take place in more than 19,000 American municipalities, more than 18,000 local enforcement jurisdictions. And so as activists and everyday citizens raise their voices, we need to be clear about where change is going to happen and how we can bring about that change. It is mayors and county executives that appoint most police chiefs and negotiate collective bargaining agreements with police unions. And that determines police practices in local communities. It's district attorneys and state's attorneys that decide typically whether or not to investigate and ultimately charge those involved in police misconduct. And those are all elected positions. And in some places, they're police community review boards with the power to monitor police conduct. Those oftentimes may be elected as well. The bottom line is, I've been hearing a little bit of chatter in the internet about voting versus protest, politics and participation versus civil disobedience and direct action. This is not a either or. This is a both and. To bring about real change, we both have to highlight a problem and make people in power uncomfortable, but we also have to translate that into practical solutions and laws that can be implemented and we can monitor and make sure we're following up on. So, very quickly, let me just close with a couple of specific things. What can we do? Number one, we know there are specific evidence-based reforms that, if we put in place today, would build trust, save lives, would not show an increase in crime. Those are included in the 21st Century Policing Task Force report. You can find it on obama.org. Number two, a lot of mayors and local elected officials read and supported the task force report, but then there wasn't enough follow-through. So today I am urging every mayor in this country to review your use of force policies with members of your community and commit to report on planned reforms. What are the specific steps you can take? And I should add, by the way, that the original task force report was done several years ago. Since that time, we've actually collected data, in part because we implemented some of these reform ideas. So we now have more information and more data as to what works. And there are organizations like Campaign Zero and Color of Change and others that are out there highlighting what the data shows, what works, what doesn't in terms of reducing incidents of police misconduct and violence. Let's go ahead and start implementing those. So we need mayors, county executives, others who are in positions of power to say this is a priority. This is a specific response. Number three, every city in this country should be a My Brother's Keeper community, because we have 250 cities, counties, tribal nations who are working to reduce the barriers and expand opportunity for boys and young men of color through programs and policy reforms and public-private partnerships. So go to our website, get working with that, because it can make a difference. And let me just close by saying this.
Okay. So he mentioned a couple things. One, the 21st Century Task Force on Policing was disbanded by Donald Trump. Just in case y'all wonder what happened to it, Trump got rid of it. That's what happened to it. Just like Jeff Sessions, when he became Attorney General, he reversed the 2013 initiative from Attorney General Eric Holder in the Department of Justice to back off of charging the longest, harshest sentences for nonviolent, low-level drug offenders for federal charges. This is federal. They don't have control over local and state, because the 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, you have state laws, you have federal laws. This is at the federal level. Jeff Sessions reversed that. Okay, just so people understand, What happened to the 21st century task force on policing? I don't hear anything about it now. Well, Trump got rid of it because elections have consequences. So watch the full video because we run out of time here. Watch the full video. The article from NBCnews.com has the full video in there. Obama calls for police reforms, tells protesters to make people in power uncomfortable. All right, and that's what they're doing. And then he talked about Campaign Zero. So Campaign Zero has, I remember when they were formed, okay? And they have what's called 8 Can't Wait. Is at the website 8cantwait.org. The number 8, CANTWAIT. 8cantwait.org. Research shows more restrictive use of force policies can reduce killings by police and save lives. And they talk about how if all 8 of these are implemented in at the local level in cities, it can reduce violent. It can reduce, I think, police killings by the 72% or something like this. Let's see, what did they say? Police departments that have adopted these use of force policies kill significantly fewer people, but few departments have adopted them. Okay, so here are the 8, and what's really good about this is you can type in the city that you are in. It lets you know which of these 8 your city has adopted. The police department in your city has adopted, and then it has the phone number to your police department as well. Okay, and I looked at Detroit. So let me see if it'll let me pull that up. Yeah, I looked at Detroit, and Detroit, if I remember correctly, has adopted maybe 4 out of 8 or 8 out of or 5 out of 8. But the 8 are ban chokeholds and strangleholds. Chokeholds cut off the oxygen, they cut off the air. Okay, they attack the throat. Chokeholds. Strangleholds attack the side of the neck and cut off the flow of blood to the brain. Chokeholds and strangleholds are not the same thing. But ban chokeholds and strangleholds. 1. Require de-escalation. 2. Require warning before shooting. 3. Require that police officers exhaust all alternatives before shooting. 4. 5. Have a duty to intervene. The Minneapolis Police Department adopted this. They just adopted this duty to intervene. If police officers see other officers are doing something illegal out of hand, like have your knee on the guy's neck for 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, they have a duty to intervene. 6. Ban shooting at moving vehicles. 7. Require use of force continuum. 8. Require comprehensive reporting. Okay. And these are things that can be done at the local level. Once again, state and local governments have more control over policing than the federal government. Everybody looks at the federal, but no, state and local governments have more control. So this is at 8cantwait.org. You can check this out. We'll post a link here. And let me see if I pulled up. Okay, I'm trying to pull up the info for Detroit Police Department. See if that'll come up. Hold on. Okay, so for the Detroit Police Department under Mayor Mike Duggan, Detroit Police Department has banned chokeholds and strangleholds. They require warning before shooting, require exhausting all alternatives before shooting, and they have a use of force continuum. Okay, so the Detroit Police Department has adopted 4 out of 8. And one of the things they do here, I saw it before, they have, was really good, they have the phone number to your mayor's office and the email for the mayor, Mayor Duggan, Duggan at DetroitMI.gov. You can send a tweet to the mayor, all this. So they really have this laid out. Go to 8cantwait.org, okay? That's something these are policies that can be implemented immediately. Okay, while you work on more longer term things. All right, I want to go to this clip here. JT, we have a clip. Let me see with Yamisha Sendor. We have clip number 1. We have clip number 1 queued up, JT.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Yamisha Alcindor. Trump has never talked about systematic racism. This was on The Last Word on MSNBC from June 6, 2020. Yamisha Alcindor, the White House correspondent for PBS NewsHour, spoke with Ali Velshi to discuss Donald Trump's lack of plans to combat systemic racism. She was also joined by Zelina Maxwell, who added that Trump has been implementing quote-unquote racist policies since the beginning of his presidency. Let's go to this clip.
Yamish, in and amongst all the back and forth with Donald Trump, you were actually trying to get to the heart of an important matter. The economy, which the president depends on for his popularity, insofar as that continues to exist, doesn't work the same for African Americans. And we have all the statistics to prove that. So you were asking a question about racial inequality, and he was asking with the economy. You didn't get what you were looking for there.
That's right. The president, even though it's been several days where we've seen protesters take to the streets in all 50 states, the president has never ever really talked about systemic racism and his plans, his specific plans for people's concerns. What we saw today was the president take a victory lap on the economy and say that we're getting better, when in fact he was ignoring the fact, as you pointed out, that Black Americans and Asian Americans saw an uptick in their unemployment. And when we talk about systemic racism, it's about the fact that George Floyd was killed by a police officer. It's also about the fact that Black people live in neighborhoods that are policed differently than more affluent neighborhoods where white people live. And then, of course, the schools in those neighborhoods then turn out to be places that are not equal. So what we see here is a confluence, almost a perfect storm of all sorts of racist practices that then turn into the fact that the police end up shooting a Black man more, or I should say disproportionately, than they would a white man. So what we see in the president is him not showing really compassion, critics say, to the victims of policing, but he's also not doing what protesters are demanding, which is actually giving them solutions and talking about what needs to change. He just hasn't done it yet.
But Zarlina, Donald Trump continues to tell everybody that he's better for African Americans in terms of prosperity. Let's listen to what he said today.
For Black, the best unemployment we've ever had.
Black poverty levels are the lowest ever recorded in the history of our country. No president has done more for our Black community.
One of the things I'm most proud about is what I've been able to do for the African American community. The lowest job numbers in the history of our country.
We've never had so many African American jobs ever in the history of our country by far.
Nobody's ever done for the Black community what President Trump has done.
And that, of course, that last comment was made today, but this is really over the last 4 months or so. Zarlina, who believes him?
No one, especially not Black people. And I think that one of the reasons the president does this, it's almost very cynical. He is not trying to win over Black voters, and he's not trying to win over our support by demonstrating all the things that he's done for us. One of the things he's doing is, because partially his rhetoric is overtly racist, he's trying to demonstrate to his supporters that they can feel okay about themselves, that supporting him doesn't make them racist. Because, see, Donald Trump said he is helping the Black people. Additionally, I think he does this to suppress the vote and continue to do what he has done in 2016. So I think there's sort of a two-pronged thing. It gives cover to the racist policies that he has been implementing since the beginning of his presidency. Now, I think this pandemic and protest movement that is built out of the police killing of George Floyd is an interesting moment to think of in a through line that goes back to the protests against the Muslim ban, the protests against the child separation policies, and the fact that what we're really experiencing here is a generational shift. And I don't think it's a coincidence that parents and a lot of college students and young people have been quarantined together for months, and they're seeing and able to discuss at least some of these inequities and systemic problems that Yamish had referenced and asked the president about today.
Okay, so that was from The Last Word on MSNBC. Ali Velshi was sitting in for Lawrence O'Donnell. That's from June 6, 2020. That's at msnbc.com. Watch that clip. The name of that clip is Yamiche Alcindor. Trump has never talked about systemic racism. He doesn't. He didn't want to address inequities. He didn't want to address the fact. She hemmed him up at the White House press conference on Friday. He didn't want to address the fact that the unemployment rate for white people dropped, but the unemployment rate for African Americans ticked up by 1/10 of a percentage point. And then, if you read the article from NPR.org, Trump says strong economy will bring racial justice. This fool was asked what his plan was to address concerns expressed by the protesters who are protesting all across the country right now. Donald Trump said, quote, "That's what my plan is. We're going to have the strongest economy in the world," end quote. Okay. Now, New York Times has a fact check on his claims. How much time we have left, JT?
Yeah, about 2.5 minutes.
Okay. New York Times has this fact check that came out June 5th, 2020, updated June 7th. Trump's false claim that, quote, nobody has ever done, end quote, more for the black community than he has. Trump's false claim that nobody has ever done more for the black community than he has. The records of Presidents Abraham Lincoln and Lyndon B. Johnson, among others, beg to differ. Go read this article from the New York Times. We're going to post this link here, because he's just lying. Look, those lies ain't gonna work this time. Okay, those lies are not gonna work this time. All right. So there was a misclassification error also that took place dealing with the job numbers that came out Friday. There was a special note at the end of the jobs report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that said that if this misclassification error had not occurred, the overall unemployment rate would have been about 3 percentage points higher than reported, meaning that the unemployment rate would be about 16.3% for May. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, the agency that puts out the monthly jobs reports, said it's working to fix the problem. I'm not sure why there was a problem. If you know, if you had to put a note there that says there was a problem with the misclassification error, why the error took place. But anyway, okay. Read this article from Washington Post. A misclassification error made the May unemployment rate look better than it is. Here's what happened. That's from Heather Long at the Washington Post. Okay, we're out of time here. We're gonna continue the discussion on my social media platforms, the African History Network on Facebook and Michael Imhotep on YouTube, IMHOTEP. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Also, if you want to donate to the African History Network, $, the AHNShow through Cash App, $, the AHNShow through Cash App, or paypal.me/the AHNShow through PayPal. Also at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All of my DVD lectures are available at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com as well. Thanks for all the birthday wishes. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Because right now, it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. Stay tuned for Pastor Mo. We'll talk to you next time. Peace. All right. So we do 2 hours. We're going to continue here. We do 2 hours on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation WFDF in Detroit from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then, since I'm broadcasting from home because of Governor Gretchen Whitmer's stay-at-home order, which she said expires June 15th, so we'll see. The radio station has us broadcasting from home, so we can continue on my social media platforms. How's everybody doing? Everybody share this broadcast on your social media pages. Invite your friends to tune in also. All right, let me post a link to here. I'm gonna wrap some of this stuff up because it's been a long weekend. It's been a long day. My 3-year-old daughter yesterday said, she said it's Dad's birthday, so she calls me Dad. She can say Daddy, but she calls me Dad. I try to get her to say Daddy instead of Daddy, but she can call me Dad as long as she wants to. But okay. But anyway, let's see here. I think I have another clip that I want to cue up. I have so much information. I have like a ton of information to try to squeeze into 3 hours. So I may have to do some other broadcasts throughout the week dealing with this. Okay, but I wanted this is a critical time, and I'm doing research constantly. So I want to make sure we try to get this in. Okay, So let's do a quick reset. Those just tuning in, you listen to the African History Network show. You're watching the African History Network show. We did 2 hours on radio here in Detroit, 9:10 a.m. at Superstation WFDF, and then also, we're continuing on my social media platforms. We're dealing with a number of different topics here. Let's do a reset on what we talked about. We talked about George Floyd protests, organized tens of thousands of people across the country and around the world fighting against racism and police violence. Police departments announced reforms. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell admits the NFL was wrong not to encourage NFL players to protest peacefully. However, he did not apologize to Colin Kaepernick, who started this whole thing, right? And sued you all for blackballing him from the NFL. And you ain't apologize to Colin Kaepernick? Okay. President Barack Obama speaks out on the killing of George Floyd and gave encouragement to protesters. So I played remarks from President Obama, the last president to win the popular vote and the Electoral College twice. Okay. Then also police union chief trashes George Floyd and is a Trump supporter. That's Minneapolis Police Union Chief Lieutenant Bob Kroll, Kroll. Why do police unions have so much power? New York Times has an extensive article dealing with this that came out June 6th. How police unions became such powerful opponents to reform efforts. How police unions became such powerful opponents to reform efforts. Half a decade after a spat of officer-involved deaths inspired widespread protests, many police unions are digging in to defend members. And we saw Bob Kroll, who's the president of the Minneapolis Police Union, and the 9 city council members just announced that they're going to disband the Minneapolis Police Department. Lieutenant Bob Kroll is defending the 4 officers who were involved in killing George Floyd. Over the past 5 years, now this article from New York Times, and we'll post a link here, it's written by Noam Schreiber, Farrah Stockman, and J. David Goodman. This is from January 6, 2020. Over the past 5 years, as demands for reform have mounted in the aftermath of police violence in cities like Ferguson, Missouri, Baltimore, and now Minneapolis, Minnesota, police unions have emerged as one of the most significant roadblocks to change. The greater the political pressure for reform, the more defiant the unions often are in resisting this reform, with few city officials, including liberal leaders, able to overcome their opposition. They aggressively protect the rights of members accused of misconduct, often in arbitration hearings that have hold on. Okay, often in arbitration hearings, the greater the political pressure for reform, the more defiant the unions often are in resisting it, with few city officials, including liberal leaders, able to overcome their opposition. They aggressively protect the rights of members accused of misconduct, often in arbitration hearings that they have battled to keep behind closed doors. And they have also been remarkably effective at fending off broader change, using their political clout and influence to derail efforts to increase accountability. While rates of union membership have dropped by half nationally since the early 1980s to 10%, higher membership rates among police unions give them resources they can spend on campaigns and litigation, political campaigns, elected officials, and litigation to block reform. A single New York City police union has spent more than $1 million on state and local races since 2014. In St. Louis, when Kim Gardner, who's African American female, was elected the top prosecutor 4 years ago, she set out to rein the city's high rate of police violence. Rein in the city's high rate of police violence. But after she proposed a unit within the prosecutor's office that would independently investigate misconduct, she ran into the powerful local union. I've talked about this as well. She is trying to invoke the 1871 Ku Klux Klan Act, okay, to get a federal judge to intervene. Now, the union pressured lawmakers to set aside the proposal, which many supported, but then never brought to a vote. Around the same time, a lawyer for the union waged a legal fight to limit the ability of the prosecutor's office to investigate police misconduct. The following year, a leader of the union said Prosecutor Kim Gardner should be removed by force or by choice. Should be removed by force or by choice. That sounds like a threat to me. Politicians tempted to cross police unions have long feared being labeled soft on crime by the unions or more serious consequences. When Steve Fletcher, a Minneapolis city councilman and frequent police department critic, sought to divert money away from hiring officers and toward a newly created Office of Violence Prevention, he said the police stopped responding as quickly to 911 calls placed by his constituents. Quote, it operates a little bit like a protection racket, end quote, Mr. Fletcher said of the union. It operates a little bit like a protection racket, okay? So a spokesman for the Minneapolis Police Department said he was unable to comment. A few days after prosecutors in Minneapolis charged an officer with murder in the death of George Floyd, the president of the city's police union denounced political leaders, accusing them of selling out his members and firing 4 officers without due process. Well, George Floyd was killed gruesomely, horrifically without due process. Lieutenant Bob Krall, K-O-R-L-L, said, quote, it is despicable behavior, end quote. He's the union president we've been talking about. He wrote in a letter to union members obtained by a local reporter. He also referred to protesters as a, quote, terrorist movement, end quote. Now, Lieutenant Bob Krall, who is himself the subject of at least 29 complaints, he seems like such a nice guy. He's himself the subject of at least 29 complaints, has also chided the Obama administration for its, quote, oppression of police, end quote, and praised Donald Trump as someone who, quote, put the handcuffs on the criminals instead of us, end quote. Now, in other instances, unions have not resisted reforms outright, but have made them difficult to put in place. Federal intervention is often one of the few reliable ways of reforming police departments. Those are the consent decrees coming from the Department of Justice, but the Trump Department of Justice has stopped doing consent decrees. But in federal intervention is often one of the few reliable ways of reforming police departments, because see, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, he backed off when he became Attorney General. He reversed the policies of the Obama administration. He backed off of doing consent decrees, investigations into the patterns and practices of police departments, because the Trump administration has largely taken a hands-off approach to policing. But in Cleveland, the union helped slow the adoption of reforms mandated by a federal consent decree, according to Jonathan Smith, a former U.S. Justice Department official who oversaw the government's investigation of policing practices there. Jonathan Smith said union officials had, now the consent decree under the with Cleveland, I think that was under the Obama administration, if I remember correctly. Sure as hell wasn't Trump. I think that was under the Obama administration after Tamir Rice was killed. Okay, that brought about an investigation into the patterns and practices of the Cleveland Police Department. So Jonathan Smith said union officials had signaled to rank and file officers that the changes should not be taken seriously, such as a requirement that they report and investigate instances in which they pointed a gun. Quote, I heard this in lots of departments, end quote, Jonathan Smith said. Quote, wait it out. Do the minimum you have to do, end quote. He said he believed that the reforms have since taken hold. He said he believed that the reforms have since taken hold. Steve Loomis, the Cleveland Police Union president, at the time of the consent decree, said he and his colleagues saw some of the mandated rules as counterproductive. Steve Loomis said, quote, every time a kid points a gun, he has to do a use of force investigation. He said this of his younger colleagues. Quote, now guys aren't pointing their guns when they should be pointing their guns, end quote. Now, Robert Bruno, B-R-U-N-O, a professor of labor relations at the University of Illinois, posited that many police officers see themselves as authority figures who equate compromise with weakness. Equate compromise with weakness. Other experts said it was rational for police unions, which are often regarded with suspicion by others in the labor movement and see themselves as distinct from it, to protect their members so relentlessly. Dale Bellman, B-E-L-M-A-N, who is a labor relations professor at Michigan State University, who has consulted for police unions, said, quote, a major role for police unions is basically as an insurance policy. A major role for police unions is basically as an insurance policy. The feeling of a lot of officers is that it's very easy to sacrifice them. Something goes wrong and boom, end quote. This has only become more true in an era of ubiquitous cell phone cameras and social media, and the feeling of being under siege has only strengthened demands from union members that they be protected. In Baltimore, where the city and the Justice Department, the Obama Justice Department, reached a consent decree in 2017 to overhaul police conduct in the Baltimore Police Department, the union has described a police department in chaos, with severe staff shortages and low morale. Those who remain said they feel unsupported by their commanders. Now, keep in mind, when Jeff Sessions became Donald Trump's first Attorney General, what did Jeff Sessions try to do with this consent decree? He tried to back out of it with the Chicago Police Department and the Baltimore Police Department. Quote, they're ready to throw police officers under the bus to appease the media and don't support us even when our actions are appropriate, end quote, said one officer surveyed in a report released last year by a group helping the department implement reforms. Okay, so once again, this is from, it's a huge article from the New York Times from June 6, 2020, how police unions became such powerful opponents to reform efforts. How police unions became such powerful opponents to reform efforts. So check this out at NewYorkTimes.com. There's more to it. I'm just on page 4, so you can read the rest of it yourself. It remains to be seen how the unions will respond to reform initiatives by cities and states since George Floyd's death, including a new ban on chokeholds in Minneapolis. I don't think they're going to respond too well to Minneapolis Police Department being disbanded, but we'll see. Maybe they'll surprise us. But in recent days, unions have continued to show solidarity with officers accused of abusive behavior. The president of a police union in Buffalo, New York, said the union stood, quote, 100%, end quote, behind two officers who were suspended on Thursday after appearing to push an older man, he was 75 years old, who fell and suffered head injuries. The police report said that he tripped. The police report didn't say he was pushed. It was a video that surfaced showing that it was an officer who actually pushed him. The police report said he tripped and fell. Okay. The union president said the officers were simply following orders. And then all 57 officers of the emergency response team, a special squad formed to respond to riots, had resigned from their posts on the team in support of the 2 suspended officers, according to the Buffalo News. And that video went viral. This was a 75-year-old man. Now, I don't know what he said to them. He could have talked about their mama, didn't justify them pushing him. Okay? And then you saw one officer was going to go and kneel down and appear to attend to them, and then the other officer, who may have been a superior, waves him off, and then radios, I don't know where the radio, and the guy's just laying there, bleeding from his head and appears from his ear also. Unions can be so effective at defending their members that cops with a pattern of abuse can be left untouched with fatal consequences. In Chicago, after the killing of 17-year-old Laquan McDonald by Officer Jason Van Dyke, it emerged that Jason Van Dyke had been the subject of multiple complaints already. But a code of silence, quote unquote, a code of silence and misconduct was effectively baked into the labor agreements between police unions and the city, according to a report conducted by task force, by a task force or the task force. New York City's police unions have been among the most vocal opponents of reforms in Albany, New York, including calls to reform the state's tight restrictions on the disciplinary records of officers. Amid growing momentum in recent days for making those records public, the city's police unions joined statewide police groups on Friday, June 5th, in urging the state legislature to keep the law in place. Quote, no rational policy discussion can take place against a backdrop of burning police vehicles and looted storefronts, end quote, read a memo of opposition from the police groups. Okay, so read the rest of this article here, okay? And then BusinessInsider.com has a big article from June 6, 2020. The battle between the Minneapolis police chief, the battle between the Minneapolis police chief of police, who is African American, who once sued the Department for Racial Discrimination, and the city's bombastic union leader, is a showcase in how cops resist reform. A showcase in how cops resist reform. Check out that article also, okay? And then at the beginning of the show, we talked about the article from Politico.com from June 4th, 2020. Police groups break with Joe Biden. Police groups break with Joe Biden. Joe Biden's call for more national policing reforms and oversight in the wake of the death of George Floyd, and the perception that he has not shown enough solidarity with law enforcement amid the ensuing nationwide protests and unrest, have created a fissure with law enforcement groups, leaving many who once supported Joe Biden frustrated by what they regard as political posturing by their one-time ally. No, what's happened is the times have changed. This is not the 90s. Like I said at the beginning of the show, violent crimes peaked in 1992. Today, violent crimes are at about near a 44-year low. Times have changed. Okay, so we have those articles here, and then so we talked about the unemployment numbers. The May unemployment rate dropped to 13.3% from 14.7%. The positive news was complicated by the fact that the Bureau of Labor Statistics said it had misclassified data in May 2020 as it had in April and March. Without the error, the unemployment rate would be higher, 16.3% for May, down from 19.7% for April, the agency said. Many economists have been predicting the unemployment rate might hit 20%, but they seem to underestimate the effect of the economy's reopening, as well as programs such as Paycheck Protection Programs, PPP, which steered $660 billion in loans to medium and small businesses with incentives to rehire employees. So the economy is drastically propped up from the money from the PPP loans, also the money that the Fed, the trillions of dollars the Fed has injected into the economy, but especially the Paycheck Protection money. And as I stated before, so read this article from WashingtonPost.com. Unemployment rate drops and 2.5 million jobs added after states reopen. And then look at the article dealing with the misclassification era. Unemployment rate falls to 13.3%. Oh, no, hold on. That's BlackAmericaWeb.com has this article that they picked up from the Associated Press. Unemployment rate falls to 13.3%. U.S. adds 2.5 million jobs. But the article from the Washington Post dealing with the misclassification era is a misclassification error made the May unemployment rate look better than it is. A misclassification error made the May unemployment rate look better than it is. Here's what happened. Okay, so when the U.S. government's official jobs report for May came out on Friday, June 5th, it included a note at the bottom saying there had been a major error indicating that the unemployment rate likely should be higher than the widely reported 13.3%. Now, I don't think Donald Trump mentioned this in his little press conference he had in the Rose Garden. I don't think he mentioned this major miscalculation error. The special note said that if this misclassification error had not occurred, the overall unemployment rate would have been about 3 percentage points higher than reported, end quote, meaning the unemployment rate would be 16.3%. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, the agency that puts out the monthly jobs reports, said it was working to fix the problem. I don't know why this problem keeps happening, but okay, all right. Quote, BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the Census Bureau are investigating why this misclassification error continues to occur and are taking additional steps to address the issue, end quote, said a note at the bottom of the Bureau of Labor Statistics report. Because I read it, it explain it, okay? Quote, you can 100% discount the possibility that Trump got to the BLS, not 98% discount, not 99.9% discount, but 100% discount, end quote, tweeted Jason Furman, the former top economist for former President Barack Obama. Quote, BLS has 2,400 career staff of enormous integrity and one political appointee with no scope to change this number, end quote. Now, let me see something here. One of the things that was talked about was that the unemployment rate for African Americans went up about 1/10 of a percentage point from 16.7 to 16.8. Donald Trump didn't want to mention that. Okay, so read this article also, okay? A misclassification error made the May unemployment rate look better than it is. Here's what happened. That's by Heather Long at Washington Post. She reads some good articles. Heather Long writes some good articles. I read Washington Post, New York Times every day, and other publications also. My girl over at Associated Press, Kat Stafford, has an article that just came out from Associated Press. I posted this earlier today. Black activists push for criminal justice system overhaul. Black activists push for criminal justice system overhaul with Facebook friends. And this deals with how they are, some saying defund the police, some saying abolish police, the different perspectives on this. That's what this article breaks down. Black activists believe the police killing of George Floyd and the nationwide civil unrest that followed could be the catalyst for overhauling the criminal justice system. Okay, let's see here. So read that article here. I don't have time to get. Maybe we'll talk about it next week. We saw that the three officers who were involved in the death of George Floyd, we saw them arrested this past week. Let me see here. Let's see if we can play this clip here. Ex-Minneapolis cop told other officers, "You shouldn't do this," during George Floyd's arrest, lawyer says. One of the 4 Minneapolis police officers charged in George Floyd's death tried to warn his fellow officers during the arrest, his attorney claimed in court this past Thursday. The man, J. Alexander Coing, not sure how to pronounce the last name, Kueng, Coing, had not yet completed his 3rd full shift as a police officer when the deadly arrest occurred, his attorney Tom Plunkett claimed. So because the other three guys were like in training, they were doing the job. Chauvin was the training officer. Okay, now this guy had like 18 complaints against him, so why he's the training officer, I don't understand. Training them to do what? So Jay Alexander, this was his third full shift as a police officer. Another guy, this was his fourth day on the job. So Jay Alexander Cohen was in court Thursday along with former officers Tal Theo and Thomas Lane after they were charged Wednesday with aiding and abetting murder, as well as aiding and abetting manslaughter. A fourth former officer, Derek Chauvin, was charged with second-degree murder after video showed that Chauvin placed his knee on George Floyd's neck. Okay, so read the rest of this article here. It's going to be interesting to see what happens to it, because I understand you in training, and some people, and there were reports that one of them said, "Hey, should we sit him up? Should we turn him over on his back or something?" But at some point, something should kick in and say, "Hey, get off of him." I know he's training you, but once again, training you to do what? At some point, something should kick in and say, "Hey, look, I think you're killing him. I think you need to get off. I think you need to stop it. I don't feel a pulse." But okay. A lot of people recently have been, with all this taking place, you hear talk about 1619 and we're dealing with 400 years and all this, right? And a lot of people are talking about white fragility, white supremacy, and white fragility. Now, the author of the book White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo, was interviewed by Joanne Reed on AM Joy on Sunday, June 7th, okay? And they talked about white fragility and what's going on now. Let's go to this clip.
There are so many dimensions that come together. There's not one single thing that makes it so hard for white people to see and understand racism, much less honestly care about racism. And the first thing is that we don't even understand what it is. We're taught to think about it as individual acts committed by mean, intentional people. And that definition, I don't know that you could have come up with a more effective way to protect the system of racism, because it exempts virtually all white people from that system and is the root of virtually all white defensiveness, individual conscious malintent across race. Well, that leads to I'm not racist. And I would just ask white Americans to remove that phrase from their vocabulary. When we say I'm not racist, what we're conveying, and you can check me if I'm wrong here, is that we're clueless about what racism is, that we have no skills or critical awareness, that we likely can't even tell you what it means to be white, that we're going to deny and invalidate your reality and your experience. Virtually every act we could identify as racist was committed by a white person who said, I'm not racist. So being a good person and being complicit with the system become mutually exclusive. That's one challenge. Another one is this incredibly precious ideology of individualism. We're taught that we're unique and special. I mean, you were just talking about this idea that white people are objective on racism, which is outrageous. We are the least objective on racism. We are the most invested in a system that serves us and invested in not seeing that system or how it serves us. It's an example of how whiteness perverts reality, if you will. Internalized superiority is another reason. That's probably the hardest one for us to look at, but no white person misses the message that it's better to be white. At the same time, we're told we could never admit to that or we'll be bad people. We're also granted, the universal voice. We can speak for all humanity from no particular position, and you always and only speak from a very specialized, biased position. When you put all that together and then throw in segregation, most white people don't even know Black people, and let's be honest, aren't taught that there's any loss about that. Most white people go cradle to grave with no authentic relationships with Black people, and not only don't feel loss, but measure the value of their schools and neighborhoods by the absence of Black people. That's a very deep message. When you put it all together, you get some pretty intense irrationality, denial, and resistance.
You know, and to that very point, and I think it's important to point out that you get that kind of dynamic of living in a world where the Black people in your life are only on television and that you don't really know hardly any. It is not just on the right or on the left. It's kind of across the board. I have two examples for you. There's that Maryland cyclist who everybody's seen this video of him confronting actually a young white girl who's putting up a sign about George Floyd. He rips the sign out of her hands. He assaults a guy on a bike who's filming the whole thing. He's now apologized. He's actually been arrested, and he says he's sick with remorse for the pain and fear he caused the victims. He's done the apology that you have to do. So that's on the one side. On the other side, and we don't know what his political sort of leanings are, but whatever they are. On the other side, you even have with Now, Daily Beast has a piece out right now about racism at the National Organization for Women. Quote, in interviews with the Daily Beast, nearly a dozen members, employees, and visitors recalled women of color being heckled, silenced, or openly disparaged at Now meetings and offices. The behavior culminated at the 2017 conference, where witnesses say members dismissed one of the candidates, China Forts in Washington, a Black woman, as angry and entitled, and accused another candidate, Monica Weeks, of being a hot-headed Latina. On the last day of the conference, more than a dozen women, including outgoing President Terry O'Neill, marched around a conference room to protest racism inside the organization. So this doesn't appear to be simply a right-wing thing.
Oh, I think white progressives can be the worst. We're so committed to saving face to this kind of idea of ourselves as down and woke and not racist. That's where we put all our energy, trying to make sure you don't see us that way. And white women, I am a woman. I am a feminist. I experience a cis woman, by the way. I experience patriarchy and sexism. I also perpetrate racism. Experiencing one form of oppression doesn't free us from perpetrating another form. And sometimes we can be the most challenging because we're so defensive about that.
Okay, so that was from AM Joy from June 7th, 2020, Joanne Reed. So you can check that out, name of that clip. That was Robin DiAngelo, author of White Fragility. White Fragility. Okay. Stop that. And let's see. All right. There was one other clip here. Why is it this stopping? There was one other clip here. Here's Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison talking about the power of police unions. He was interviewed on MSNBC. Let's go to this clip here.
One other question is the question of the police unions. They have a lot of power. They have a lot of control over how they are managed by these states. They influence. They have a lot of influence over politicians. Is that a challenge? I mean, a lot of Democrats are very pro-union, obviously, very pro-union, pro the nurses unions, pro the food service unions. But those unions tend to be relatively weak compared to the police unions.
Well, I mean, can you imagine the nurses union having contempt for patients? I mean, look, police unions have got to figure out how to be on the side of public safety and the citizens who they're sworn to protect. We've had problems with that in Minneapolis with our police union.
Let me ask you about the Minnesota Public Schools' decision to terminate their contracts with the police department over George Floyd's death. You've had that decision. You've had the university system say that they're not going to use Minneapolis police for sporting events, et cetera. Is that the leverage that the public has at this point? Is funding, because the additional funding, the additional money that police officers can earn in those kind of systems, is that at this point, besides obviously legislation, the leverage that the public has? Do you support that leverage being used?
Well, I think that we've got to bring forth a reform, and we've got to use the tools available to do that. I believe in Madera Arredondo, who's the chief of the Minneapolis Police Department. But, you know, the chief doesn't necessarily run everything on the ground. He needs people to obey the rules and his requirements. And he, I think, is an excellent start. But I think we do need other elements of the society to insist on quality service and to not stand idly by and just let it go on and say, well, I'm not part of that. So I think that legislators, community members, faith community members, other institutions need to apply the pressure to update and reform policing in America. And again, we always say there's a lot of good police, and I would be the first to agree. I know many police officers who are great, but we need to put them in a position where the values that they live up to are the values of that department and not the lowest common denominator, because people are too intimidated to come forward when they see misconduct by another officer.
Okay, so that was from AM Joy also. That was from June 6th, 2020. All right, let's see here. Just a minute here. All right, I want to go to this next story, and then we're going to get into part 4 of Joe Biden's plan for Black America, for African Americans, strengthen America's commitment to justice. You can read all this at joebiden.com. This 22-page agenda for the African American community, very detailed agenda. And a lot of people have been asking for an agenda from Joe Biden, and then he put one out a month ago, came out May 5th, and they still haven't read it, which I find very interesting. But okay, you know, whatever. But anyway, Democrats prepare, Associated Press has this article, Black America Web picked this up, as well as NBC News. Democrats prepare sweeping police reform bills after George Floyd's death. Democrats prepare sweeping police reform bills after George Floyd's death. Now, congressional Democrats, powered by the Congressional Black Caucus, CBC, are preparing a sweeping package of police reforms as pressure builds on the federal government to respond to the death of George Floyd and others in law enforcement interactions. Now, with the urgency of mass protests outside their doors, lawmakers on Capitol Hill are working furiously to draft what could become one of the most ambitious efforts in years to oversee the way law enforcement works. Senators Cory Booker of New Jersey and Senator Kamala Harris of California, both former presidential candidates, are expected to announce a package in coming days with a House bill coming soon. Both the Senate and House of Representatives efforts are expected to include changes to police accountability laws, such as revising immunity provisions and creating a database of police use of force incidents. Revamped training requirements are planned also. Among them, a ban on the use of chokeholds. You need to have chokeholds and strangleholds because those are different. Also, you need national policies dealing with standards for police training and standards of use of force. You need national policies regarding that as well. Now, Joe Biden, the apparent Democratic presidential nominee, has endorsed such a ban. Representative Karen Bass, who is the chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, said on a conference call this past Wednesday, quote, "We have a moral moment in our country," end quote. The political stakes of any police reform effort are high, amplified in an election year by Donald Trump's law and order stance, because Donald Trump just recently said he's the law and order president, and he keeps tweeting law and order, including Donald Trump is amplifying a law and order stance, including his threats to call in the U.S. military to clamp down on protesters. With mass unrest now entering a second week, was now going into a third week now. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi sought to shift the national tone this past Wednesday by walking and talking with protesters outside the U.S. Capitol. The House of Representatives is expected to vote by month's end. She said, quote, "will be intensive, proactive," end quote, she said on MSNBC. Now, Nancy Pelosi announced during a conference call Thursday with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus that House and Senate Democrats will unveil police brutality legislation on Monday. Representative Karen Bass of California, a Democrat who's the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Senator Kamala Harris, and Senator Cory Booker are leading the process to develop this legislation. Okay, quote, "we will in the next few days be putting forth the House and Senate Democrats a proposal to address the issue of police brutality and law enforcement disparity and enforcement of certain laws. It will be very comprehensive," end quote, she said. Nancy Pelosi went on to say this is something completely different, referring to the protests over George Floyd's death. She said, quote, "we have reached, as people say, an inflection point. This was like a tinderbox. It has changed everything," end quote. Now, also, Representative Karen Bass talked about, is this Karen Bass or is this Barbara Lee? Hold on, let me see here. What was this statement? Washington, I think this was New York Times in the weekend, New York Times weekend briefing. For this weekend, a pandemic within a pandemic, a pandemic within a pandemic. Yeah, this is Representative Barbara Lee. That was the assessment of Representative Barbara Lee, Democrat of California, on the painful intersection that Black Americans find themselves in today, bearing the brunt of three crises: police violence, crushing unemployment, and the most deadly infectious disease threat in a century, COVID-19. The current civil unrest is deeply connected to the racial disparities exposed by the coronavirus. George Floyd is a case in point. He died with coronavirus antibodies in his blood. The autopsy showed that. Surviving infection only to die in police custody. The mass incarceration of African Americans has only worsened the pandemic's heavy toll on minorities, including African Americans. Quote, I'm just as likely to die from a cop as I am from COVID-19, end quote, one organizer said. Okay, now, let's see here. I'm just trying to make sure I get through most of this. Now, with Democrats in the majority, let's go back to the article from NBCNews.com, picked up from the Associated Press. Democrats prepare sweeping police reform bills after George Floyd's death. From June 4th, 2020. With Democrats in the majority, the bills will almost certainly pass in the House of Representatives, but the outcome in the U.S. Senate is less certain. Why? Because Republicans control the U.S. Senate. Democrats lost control of the Senate in 2014. Republicans have fought tooth and nail to maintain control of the U.S. Senate so they can keep pushing through Donald Trump's not just Supreme Court nominations, but also push through his federal judge nominations. He's gotten 250 federal judges confirmed. So, with Democrats in the majority, the bills will almost certainly pass in the House of Representatives, but the outcome in the U.S. Senate is less certain. Republican Majority Leader Moscow Mitch McConnell, Senator of Kentucky, who's up for re-election November 3rd, 2020, needs to be voted out of office, has said the chamber would take a look at the issues, but he has not endorsed any particular legislation. Senator Lindsey Graham, who is going to older federal judges, trying to encourage them to retire so Republicans can confirm more of Donald Trump's federal judges because they fear they're going to lose the U.S. Senate. That's that Lindsey Graham. Senator Lindsey, who's up for re-election November 3rd, 2020, needs to be voted out of office. Jamie Harrison, African-American man, is running against him, giving him a run for his money. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican of South Carolina, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, tweeted that his panel will conduct a hearing, quote, to shine a bright light on the problems associated with Mr. Floyd's death, with the goal of finding a better way forward for our nation, end quote. But much like efforts to stem gun violence after mass shootings, the political momentum for changes to policing procedures could fade from public view as the protests wane and the memories of those who have died in connection with police interactions dims. For example, a long-sought federal anti-lynching bill has languished in Congress, and we saw this past week that Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky is blocking the bill in the Senate, anti-lynching bill. Quote, words of kindness and grace are essential to America, but they're not enough right now, Senator Cory Booker said during a Senate floor speech this past week. It's on us in this body to do something to change the law, end quote. Okay, so read the rest of this article also. There are more statements from members of the CBC. Democrats prepare sweeping police reform bills after George Floyd's death. All right, now we have an update in the Ahmaud Arbery case. So the three that killed him, they were in court. Well, two were in court this past week. Details came out about the case that a lot of people did not know. Okay, a lot of people talking about the case didn't read the police report. Some details in the police report. ABCnews.com has an article. Ahmaud Arbery was struck by vehicle before he was shot dead. Suspect yelled racial slur. That's according to the investigator for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Actually, the racial slur is alleged that Travis McMichael said effing N-word after Ahmaud Arbery was shot. The white man caught on video. If we look at the article from New York Daily News, I posted this article, it got thousands of likes. The white man caught on video gunning down unarmed black jogger Ahmaud Arbery was overheard uttering a racial slur over the victim's body. A state investigator testified Thursday. Richard Dial, D-I-A-L, a special agent with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, said co-defendant William Roddy Bryan, who filmed part of the incident, and said he was just there filming. He wasn't involved in it. He told authorities he heard Travis McMichael say effing N-word moments after the February 23rd shooting. After Ahmaud Arbery was shot, he's laying on the ground dying. It was one of several stunning details shared during a probable cause hearing Thursday at the Glenn County Courthouse. Now, Gregory McMichael and his Travis McMichael, the son, and his ex-cop father, 64-year-old Gregory McMichael, joined the hearing via a video link from the county's jail, where they're being held on felony murder and aggravated assault charges. Okay. Originally, no charges were filed in the shooting near Brunswick, Georgia, but the release of the video on May 5th sparked outrage and led to the GBI, Georgia Bureau of Investigation, taking the case. All right, and then very quickly here, so that's from New York Daily News, that article. Then abcnews.go.com, talks about Ahmaud Arbery was struck by a vehicle before shot dead. That was a new detail as well. They talked about how they coordinated the cars and tried to block him in a number of times. They dealt with how he was shot 3 times also. Let's see. Quote, we're here essentially on behalf of the citizens of Glenn County to talk about the fatal shooting February 23rd involving victim Ahmaud Arbery, who was chased, hunted down, and ultimately executed. We believe the evidence will show based on what's about to be presented to the court, said Jesse Evans, an assistant district attorney for the Cobb County District Attorney's Office, who was appointed special prosecutor on the case. The only witness called on Thursday was Richard Dial, a special agent for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, who cited video and direct statements from the suspects in the presentation of the case to the court. Under direct examination from Prosecutor Evans, Richard Dial said that William Roddy Bryan, the third suspect, told investigators that during the fatal confrontation he heard Travis Michael, who allegedly fired the 3 shots that killed Arbery, yell a racial slur to the victim as he lay down on the ground. Dial said that the investigation uncovered other instances in which Travis McMichael used racial slurs in social media. The son, Travis McMichael, used racial slurs in social media posts and in text messages to describe African Americans. Now, the investigators said Gregory McMichael, the father, armed himself with a .357 Magnum revolver, which had been issued to him when he worked for the Glenn County Police Department, and called his son, who armed himself with a pump-action shotgun. Dial said the father and son got into a pickup truck and chased after Arbery, initially stopping him in front of William Roddy Bryan's house. Okay, initially stopping him in front of William Roddy Bryan's house in the same neighborhood. The McMichaels ordered Arbery to stop, but the victim kept running, Dial said, because this white man chasing you with guns, so I'm going to run too. The father and son chased after him in their truck as Arbery tried to evade them. Richard Dial said of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, quote, Bryan also got into his vehicle and attempted to use it to block Arbery's path several times, Richard Dial said. This is what he testified to in the hearing in court. He said Bryan allegedly struck Arbery during the pursuit hard enough that it left a dent in Bryan's vehicle. Eventually, Ahmaud Arbery found himself trapped between the McMichaels' truck and Bryan's vehicle, Richard Dial said. He said Travis McMichael got out of the truck with his shotgun and that he and Arbery began to fight in the street. Part of the confrontation was caught on a cell phone video taken by William Roddy Bryan. The footage showed the first shotgun blast hitting Arbery in the chest and showing Arbery's white t-shirt immediately soaked in blood. Arbery was shot 2 additional times, once in the upper left chest and in the right wrist. After being shot, Arbery attempted to run but collapsed and died at the scene. In their closing arguments to Judge Harrell, the suspect's defense attorneys asked that the charges be dismissed. They're claiming self-defense. Really? Okay. Franklin Hogg, Gregory McMichael's attorney, argued that his client should not be charged with murder since he didn't shoot Arbery. And William Roddy Bryan's attorney, Kevin Gough, G-O-U-G-H, said his client did not know the McMichaels were allegedly, quote-unquote, acting unlawful when he saw them chasing Arbery and decided to help out. Interesting. Okay, so read the rest of this article here. Ahmaud Arbery was struck by vehicle before he was shot dead. Suspect yelled racial slur. Investigator. June 4th, 2020. abcnews.go.com. So I hope they go to prison for the rest of their lives, because that's where they belong. All right. And okay, so we got that one. We got that one. And then let's get into part 4, Joe Biden's plan for Black America. Let me see here. We dealt with that. 8 can't wait. We dealt with that. CBC. Okay. Just 1 second here. All right, how's everybody doing? Everybody share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in. Also, go back and watch last week's broadcast. We did part 3 dealing with Joe Biden's policies for the African American community. Hopefully, people will read them and then study Donald Trump's anti-black agenda. Also, read the article from May 5th, 2020. BlackPressUSA.com. This is from the National Newspaper Publishing Association. This is a black news Wire, and this is the African American newspaper publishers. Joe Biden's plan for empowering Black America. So they have an article here talking about it. Biden's in the article, Biden said the plan reflects many months of work and feedback from local elected officials, activists, organizations, practitioners, policy experts, strategists, and young people. His campaign called the plan a living document. Is going to expand. It's a living document. They're asking for feedback also. Visit joebiden.com. You can read the entire plan. And you can read his full policy platform. And he has policies for the Hispanic community, the Asian American Pacific Islander community, the African American community as well. But you can read his entire policy platform. The agenda for African Americans is broken into 6 parts. 1, advance the economic mobility of African Americans and close the racial wealth and income gaps. That's pages 2 through 11. So half of the agenda deals with economic empowerment for African Americans. So we dealt with that in week 1. Second part, expand access to high quality education and tackle racial inequity in our education system. Second part deals with education. Third part, make far reaching investments in ending health disparities by race. We dealt with that last week. This week, strengthen America's commitment to justice. Okay, dealing with criminal justice. Okay, so let's zip through this. I'm going to just give a brief overview of this, and you can read it more in depth. Strengthen America's commitment to justice. Today, too many are incarcerated in the United States, and too many of them are African American. To build safe and healthy communities, we need to rethink who we're sending to prison, how we treat those in prison, and how we help them get the health care, education, jobs, and housing they need to successfully rejoin society after they serve their time. As President, Joe Biden will strengthen America's commitment to justice and reform our criminal justice system. The Biden plan, and go back and see, was it either last week or week before, either the 31st or the 24th. I went and dealt with some history dealing with the 94 crime bill and what took place before that, because the 94 crime bill was federal law, not state law, and 87% of the people that went to prison after the crime bill became law went under state law, not federal law. A lot of people don't know the difference between the two. Okay, most people who are in prison are in state prison, not federal prison. They're under state laws, not federal laws. So a lot of people don't understand the difference here. So the Biden plan for strengthening America's commitment to justice is based on several core principles. They have bullet points and explanations. We're just going to deal with some of these bullet points. We can and must reduce the number of people incarcerated in this country while also reducing crime. Now, it's important to note that in December 2015, the U.S. prison population dropped to its lowest point in 20 years under President Obama. Okay, a lot of people don't talk about that. Newsweek.com has an article dealing with this. 2, our criminal justice system cannot be just unless we root out. Our criminal justice system cannot be just unless we root out the racial, gender, and income-based disparities in the system. African American mothers and fathers should feel confident that their children are safe walking the streets of America, and when a police officer pins on that shield and walks out the door, the officer's family should know they will come home at the end of the day. Additionally, women and children are uniquely impacted by the criminal justice system, and the system needs to address their unique needs. Next bullet point, our criminal justice system must be focused on redemption and rehabilitation. We'll talk about that. Next bullet point, no one should be profiteering off of our criminal justice system. That deals with privatized prisons. We have seen efforts at the state level to abolish privatized prisons. State of California did this in about October and November of 2019. That was passed by the state legislature. Governor Gavin Newsom signed that into law. Today, about 8%, I think it's about 8% of prisons are privatized prisons. Majority of the overwhelming majority of prisons in the U.S. are not privatized prisons, even though privatized prisons need to be abolished. In August of 2016, the Obama administration announced that they were not going to renew federal contracts for privatized prisons. You have privatized prisons federal level, privatized prisons at the state level. The day that announcement was made, the stock prices of Core Civic and Geo Group, which are two of the largest owner-operators of privatized prisons in the country, took a significant hit. And these two organizations donated almost $600,000 to Donald Trump's presidential campaign, 2016 presidential campaign. When Trump gets in office, he reverses the initiative from the Obama administration, and he renews the contracts with privatized prisons because he's an advocate for privatized prisons. In March of 2016, he was interviewed by Chris Matthews on MSNBC. And Donald Trump said privatized prisons seem to save a lot of money and they seem to work very well. No, they don't. In general, no, they don't. Okay, so next bullet point. Expand and use the power of the U.S. Department of Justice to address systemic misconduct in police departments and prosecutors' offices. They go through and explain that. Using authority and legislation spearheaded by Biden as a senator, the Obama-Biden Justice Department used pattern or practice investigations and consent decrees to address circumstances of systemic police misconduct and to restore trust between police and communities in cities such as Ferguson, Missouri. Yet the Trump administration's Justice Department has limited the use of the tool. Actually, they stopped using it. They stopped the already existing consent decrees they came back out of, but they've stopped doing investigations into police departments. Under the Biden administration, the Justice Department will again use its authority to root out unconstitutional or unlawful policing. Okay, from the federal level, well, once again, the majority of the control over policing is at the state and local level, not federal level. The consent decrees, that's the power given to the Department of Justice from the U.S. Congress, okay? But at the federal level, they can only do so much. All right. The Justice Department will again use its authority to root out unconstitutional or unlawful policing. In addition, Biden will push for legislation to clarify that this pattern or practice investigation authority can also be used to address systemic misconduct by prosecutors' offices. Next bullet point, establish an independent task force on prosecutorial discretion. Next bullet point, reinvigorate community-oriented policing. They have explanations for this. I don't have time to get into it. Next bullet point, invest in public defenders' offices to ensure defendants' access to quality counsel. Next bullet point, create a $20 billion grant program to support criminal justice reform at the state and local level. Next bullet point, reform sentencing. Biden will work with Congress to reform federal sentencing and provide incentives to state and local systems to do the same. Next bullet point, end the criminalization of poverty. Cash bail is the modern day debtor's prison. Biden will lead a national effort to end cash bail and reform our pretrial system by putting in place instead a system that is fair and does not inject further discrimination or bias into the process. Next bullet point, stop corporations from profiteering off of incarceration. That deals with privatized prisons. Next bullet point, eliminate existing barriers preventing formerly incarcerated individuals from fully participating in society. For example, Joe Biden will eliminate barriers keeping formerly incarcerated individuals from accessing public assistance such as SNAP programs, food stamps, things like this, Pell Grants, and housing support. Okay, read the rest of that. Next bullet point, reform the juvenile justice system. Reform the juvenile justice system. Biden will invest $1 billion per year in the juvenile justice reform. He will expand funding for after-school programs, community centers, and summer jobs to keep young people active, busy, learning, and having fun, etc. Read the rest of it. Biden will double the number of mental health professionals in our schools so behavioral and emotional challenges can be addressed by appropriately skilled psychologists, counselors, and social workers, not our criminal justice system. Next bullet point, make our communities safer. Biden will pursue evidence-based measures to root out persistent violent crime. Violent offenders need to be held accountable, and survivors need to have access to support to deal with the physical, psychological, and financial consequences of violence. Read the rest of it. Okay, so that deals with criminal justice. That's ends on page 20. We'll deal with part 5 next week, which deals with make the right to vote and the right to equal protection real for African Americans. All right. Hey, if you like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network, $, the AHN Show through Cash App, $, the AHN Show through Cash App, and paypal.me/the AHN Show through PayPal. Thanks for tuning in to the African History Network show. Thanks for the birthday wishes. Remember, right knowledge corrects wrong behaviors. Not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next week. Peace.